100K on the fuck boss. Fucker look like they could trust boss. Yeah, full of hate, I'ma kill y'all. Sick you riding on blades like a hot boss. Ay, 50K on the chain. Great, that's a gang. Load the case, sleep a stain. Fucking writing on my brain. Split it back up with the cock out like a menace. Give me a minute, I'ma make sure that it's finished. If I'm riding, better call and say your penis. Should've listened to your bitch in the beginning. A-Y-K-I-double-L-E-R. So many bodies made a hobby at that E-R. Rolling my eyes, working, I got it for my leash. Whipping the miles, pumping the shot, trick or squeeze. Breaking the beats, swerving the beans, fucking the mans. Gunning and fucking, I murder the pussy and her friend. My reality is hell, I don't pretend. Yeah. I just learned to blend in with the sin. Here we go again, here we go. Wanna come and try, sick it, you should know. I got 1,000 ways for you to end it, yellow tape. And I got plenty people around me, wanna earn it right.
100K on the fuck boy. Fuck I look like, think I trust boys. Yeah, full of hate, I'ma kill joy. We be riding on blades like a hot boy. Ay, 50K on the chain. Great, it's a gang. Load the case, leave a stain. 100, fucking right, I'm up my brain. 100K for the car, $500,000 for the addiction. They ship me off the rehab cause I started questioning my existence. Get mad at prescriptions and I show you repetition. Stop a motherfucker, you know we never listen. Grade 5'9", by time to the grave. Time flying every day, it's on my name. I confined to the page until the spine and the stain is the only thing I made it. Pulling the Mercedes, bitch, I'm pushing the updates. Vision always blurry and my memory hazy. Gray bandana out the window, waving while I'm racing. Raising my hand to the sky until the angels come and take me. Awaken my demons, bringing me down to my knees. They wanna break me, they wanna isolate me, leave me naked, fucking shaky. Grabbing that 380, voices telling me I'm crazy. Sold my soul, I'm gray until my final destination.
You can call 1-800-909-6538 or send check or money order to your 100-piece decorating kit to Morgan Avenue, Norwalk, Connecticut 06851.
On the fuck boss. Fucker look like they could trust boss. Yeah, full of hate, I'ma kill y'all. Sick you riding on blades like a hot boss. Ay, 50K on the chain. Great, that's a gang. Load the case, sleep a stain. Fucking writing on my brain. Split it back up with the cock out like a menace. Give me a minute, I'ma make sure that it's finished. If I'm riding, better call and say your penis. Should've listened to your bitch in the beginning. A-Y-K-I-double-L-E-R. So many bodies made a hobby at that E-R. Rolling my eyes, working, I got it for my leash. Whipping the miles, pumping the shot, trick or squeeze. Breaking the beats, swerving the beans, fucking the mans. Gunning and fucking, I murder the pussy and her friend. My reality is hell, I don't pretend. Yeah. I just learned to blend in with the sin. Here we go again, here we go. Wanna come and try, sick it, you should know. I got 1,000 ways for you to end it, yellow tape. And I got plenty people around me, wanna earn it right.
100K on the fuck boy. Fuck I look like, think I trust boys. Yeah, full of hate, I'ma kill joy. We be riding on blades like a hot boy. Ay, 50K on the chain. Great, it's a gang. Load the case, leave a stain. 100, fucking right, I'm up my brain. 100K for the car, $500,000 for the addiction. They ship me off the rehab cause I started questioning my existence. Get mad at prescriptions and I show you repetition. Stop a motherfucker, you know we never listen. Grade 5'9", by time to the grave. Time flying every day, it's on my name. I confined to the page until the spine and the stain is the only thing I made it. Pulling the Mercedes, bitch, I'm pushing the updates. Vision always blurry and my memory hazy. Gray bandana out the window, waving while I'm racing. Raising my my hand to the sky and tell the angels come and take me. Awaken my demons, bringing me down to my knees. They wanna break me, they wanna isolate me, leave me naked, fucking shaky. Gripping that 380, voices telling me I'm crazy. Till my soul I'm gray until my final destination.
You can call 1-800-909-6538 or send check or money order to
I'm a fuck boss. Fucker look like they could trust boss. Yeah, full of hate, I'ma kill y'all. Sick you riding on blades like a hot boss. Hey, 50K on the chain. Great, that's a gang. Load the case, sleep a stain. Fucking writing on my brain. Split it back up with the cock out like a menace. Give me a minute, I'ma make sure that it's finished. If I'm riding, better call and say your penis. Should've listened to your bitch in the beginning. A-Y-K-I-double-L-E-R. So many bodies made a hobby at that E-R. Rolling my eyes, working I got it for my leisure. Whipping the miles and pumping the shot and trick or squeeze. Breaking the beats, swerving the beans, fucking the mans. Gunning and fucking, I murder the pussy and her friend. My reality is hell, I don't pretend. Yeah. I just learned to blend in with the sin. Here we go again, here we go.
Unethical behavior on his part.
Okay. J425 live. Let's see. Is the microphone working? I hope so. Looks that way. Well, I gotta say, this is not something I've been looking forward to doing. Man, if anything's weighed heavy on me in the last 10 years of journalism, it's been this. It's like I didn't sleep much when I was doing the Predator stuff, but digging into this and what I mean by this, the history of transgender policy is just crazy. And before I get into this, just a brief reason for why this is the topic. So 2 years ago, I wrote a story about Lake Stevens School's gender inclusive policy, which is just something they adopted in 2021, partially because the state makes you and partially because they added some stuff into it as well. And it's just basically their policy for non-bullying, basically, but also for like facilitating transgender students and their transition, basically. So they go a little bit further along than necessary, basically saying that they'll support the kid's wish to be called any name or gender, and that they'll support their transition, and that they don't necessarily need to involve the parent and that sort of thing. So now, like I said, I wrote about this a couple years ago, pretty much right down the middle. But the part where they talk about not involving the parents, I knew that always just stuck with me, is that was going to be a problem, or that was going to be something that just needed to be revisited, because the idea of, let's just set aside the whether a transition is safe or not. Some people have religious issues with the whole concept of transgenderism, and there's a lot of different topics that involve student safety, where a school district might have in the past said, hey, we're going to cut the parents out of this if we think it's too dangerous. But it just really hadn't happened before. And this was the first time I'd ever seen anything where they said, the district will not condone the intentional or persistent refusal to respect a student's gender identity or gender expression, or the inappropriate release of information regarding a student's transgender or gender expansive status. He goes on to talk about how, if the parent isn't with it, they're going to be either they have to get right or they're going to get cut out of the process. And so that's one thing. If you accept at face value that everything is going to work out fine, if a kid is going to get transitioned from one thing to the next, it's still controversial, for a school district to cut a parent out. And back then, when I first saw this, I wasn't even thinking about, what's turned out to be the massive medical and physical issues with the transition process that they've been putting these kids through. So just to fast forward for a sec, the story here that we're going to be covering is not about kids. It's not about gender nonconforming kids. It's not about people with body issues. It's not about the kids at all. It's not about the transgender youths at all. It's about the complex that's been built around them, and that has been allowed to like insert themselves into the public school system and then tell us what is true, what we can say, what to what level we can participate in our kids' life. And they also like assert things as fact that just turned out to absolutely not be fact. And in fact, some of the stuff that they said was like absolutely necessary turned out to be fatal in some cases and forever harming in others. So we'll get to that. That's what we're going to talk about a little bit today. But when I first saw it in 2021, I was just thinking, well, the school district is basically saying we got this better than the parent. Like if the parent doesn't understand, gender expansive theory, then like we're in a better position to take care of your kid than you are. And I was just thinking at that time, well, we don't have a great record of like making kid-centric decisions. I mean, we had predators here for 30 straight years and uninterrupted, and now we're going to say we're the parent. So I just kind of filed that away in my head and thought I'm going to have to get back to that. So with Julian's trial coming up this week, it just clicked into my head again. I should go revisit the gender policy in the part where it says, that we can kick the parents out of the process if we need to. And so in doing that, I started like really kind of studying, okay, where did we get this transgender policy? Like, why did they have to put this in? And basically what the policy says is, you're going to support any kid that has a transgender identity, and you're going to support whatever he wants to be called, whatever pronouns he or she wants, whatever bathroom he wants to use, whatever sports team he wants to play for, all of that stuff. And then it starts to talk about transitioning, and there's even like there's transition plans, and there's a slot on the transition plan for whether the parent will be included in the process or not. And when I started to realize that the transition means, by definition, this process where you're going to go from basically therapy to some sort of drug regimen and then ultimately to a surgery. That's what it means, basically. And they tell you in the paperwork and this stuff that they're handing out in 2021 that like the drug regimens, the puberty blockers, they just assert that it's safe, and that to question it is basically transphobic. And the district lets them come in and advance that as fact. And well, now as we'll get to. Well, actually, let me just I'll just fast forward ahead, and we'll deal with like just a quick preview of the puberty blocker thing. Here's the deal with puberty blockers. So the idea is if a kid doesn't know for sure what gender they're going to be, but they might be transitioning, you don't want to go through puberty in theory then, because like if you're going to be male to female, like going through male puberty is going to really mess up, your body for the female identity that you are headed towards. And also it's going to be mentally, tough. And it's just something where they've asserted, we can use modern medicine to just kind of call a timeout, no harm, no foul. It'll give the kid a window of time to think about what they want to do. And then if they change their mind, we can just take them off the puberty blockers. Their normal body will take over. Everything will just be fine. That's what was asserted. Well, that's not at all what happened. Basically, as soon as you started puberty blockers, you're like pot committed, and you ended up having to get all the way through the whole process anyways for a number of different reasons. But the other thing that we found out is that the stuff that they were calling puberty blockers is actually chemical castration, and not like a little bit. Like it's literally what they give to serial sex offender deviant dudes when they want to chemically castrate them. So I'll give you a little bit of that from a Oxford researcher who kind of figured that out. And if you're thinking like, well, how could we not know that? You're going to see that again and again in this, because one of the things about transgender policy and this whole transition thing is not done by medical doctors. Like the snipping and stuff is, but the theory is done by people who aren't medical doctors and who in point of fact, are just kind of doing some Dr. Frankenstein shit. Like they really are. And you'll see that in the oral history I'm going to do today. But let's just listen to an Oxford clinician talking about what he felt like when he realized that they were giving kids chemical castration medicine.
And so I wasn't seeing from my scrutiny, oh, they're giving kids the same drug they give to chemically castrate sex offenders. And I thought that's obviously nonsense. Obviously they're not going to do that. And then I looked into a bit more, and this drug Lupron, which is used in America, was the same drug. And I thought it must be the same, must be a very different dose. They must be giving a 1/100th of the dose to these kids that they give to the sex offenders. And then I realized it's the same dose. And then I became a bit more concerned about this. And I started reading because I'm a social scientist, so I start reading the literature. When I read the first paper from the Dutch clinicians about the first guinea pig, the girl that is now called sort of FG, or was called B in the paper, I thought, this doesn't seem like a good outcome at all. Why is this meant to be a good outcome? Because when she was followed up.
Could you explain why it's not a good outcome?
Because when she was followed up at the age of in her 30s or early 30s, or his early 30s, whichever.
This is unbelievable, by the way.
They were ashamed of their genitals and couldn't hold down a relationship with a woman because they're so sort of ashamed of their genitals. So it was very odd to say, well, that we've cured the gender dysphoria, but this person's very ashamed of their genitals and can't have.
And this was the only long-term study we really had of something.
Yeah, and and supposedly that was how wonderful. This was the study that came out in 2014, the follow-up study. So I thought that doesn't sound good at all. And then when I looked at the article that really lays out the sort of the positive empirical evidence, again 2014, they started off with 70 kids, and then one of them dies. So I think that doesn't seem such a great thing. If you take 70 healthy Dutch teenagers, probably have a longest life expectancy of any country in the world, and then you kill one of them. That again. I wasn't.
He's talking about the study that facilitated the policy that got put into policy here in Lake Stevens and other places in Washington State. The sample size was ridiculously small to begin with. It was 70. They only ended up documenting 38 of them. One of them died. One of the kids died in the study that facilitates this. And he's going to get to it. But it wasn't just a death. It was a scene from hell. It was a male to female transition where he'd been on puberty blockers for so long that not only had his penis stopped growing, and I'm sorry, there's going to be a lot of language like that because you got to be specific in this stuff. He'd been on puberty blockers for so long that not only had his penis stopped growing, it had shrunk 25% of what it was to begin with. They need that flesh to craft the artificial fake vagina that they're going to give him. But there wasn't enough left when it came to that. So what they did instead is they yanked his intestine out his ass and they used that to craft a fake vagina. And that got infected and he died of that infection. Now, if that doesn't and they called that an okay outcome. And off of that, they put it in policy over here and talk about how everybody needs to support this. And if you don't support it, you're going to be cut out of the process. You're a transphobe, so on and so forth. Obviously, you're not. But just think about how difficult they've made it. And when I say they, I'm talking about the adults, the complex around this. We'll get to that. But if you think about how difficult it's been to talk about anything having to do with transgender transitions, that sort of thing for the last 5-6 years. If Elon didn't buy Twitter, I wouldn't have been able to cover this. You couldn't even begin to get into this research. You couldn't get on top of any of it. And the part that boggles the mind is you would assume or hope that it wouldn't be about trying to get to some predetermined social outcome, right? It would really be about what's best for the kids, and then we'd have to just get behind that. Whether it's something that aligns with our politics or not, we should be expected to get behind it if it's good for the kids. But to sacrifice not only their health but lives, and when a kid dies or is maimed from a failed gender transition surgery, that tragedy doesn't stop there. That fucking wipes out families. Think about it. So I'll let him finish. And this isn't like old news. These studies were like going on in like 2014, 2018, that sort of thing. And as you'll find out, America is like a lot further out on the limb than everywhere else. Everywhere else has been pulling back. UK closed the biggest gender transition clinic in the world, Tavistock, after this kind of stuff came out. We've just been putting the foot down to the pedal because we got all these people just spouting this fake policy and canceling you left and right and doing this bullshit lies like, would you rather have a dead son or a new daughter or whatever that bullshit is? Complete lies, emotional blackmail, but like we've allowed for it to happen. And you know, it should have been a clue, and it was at the time. This is schools in transition. This is like the policy guide that the districts got for implementing the model policy. So each district had to implement a model policy that basically just had a couple sentences about not bullying and that sort of thing. But this was 70 pages about extras. Like if you wanted to put in the extras and be like really out there and really supportive of trans kids, this was the guide that was going to get you there. And it's purported to be like the best known science, the best known research, all that kind of stuff. And this is put out by OSPI. This is put out by the state, Superintendent of Public Instruction. But you look at the authors of it: Transgender Youth Project staff attorney at the National Center for Lesbian Rights, and the senior director at Gender Spectrum are the co-authors. Neither one's a doctor, and they're both for far left political entities that have the advancement of the transgender concept as one of their core policy items that they need to achieve. So already you're like horribly biased, and you'd think that the people who run public education wouldn't be letting partisan policy hacks from either side come in and dictate our kids' safety. The other entities that funded the technical document that facilitates the rollout of transgender policy is an organization called Gender Spectrum, the Human Rights Campaign, the ACLU, Transgender Project, and then NEA. Now, you may be thinking, oh, ACLU, that's pretty good, right? That's civil liberties, and Human Rights Campaign, that's pretty good too. Well, I'm going to show you that this concept of adults in the social sciences coming up with some ideas that are sexually way out there, that involve adults getting close to kids and getting involved in their genitalia and their sex lives, and that end up with huge cases of abuse, death, and injury to kids. This is not a new concept. It's not a new thing. And there's been this archetype of this type of guy who's a psychiatrist or a sex researcher, and he works at the ACLU or the Human Rights Campaign, or maybe he's the founder of those sort of things. There's like 3 or 4 different versions of this same guy in different states who's gone on to molest or ruin 1,000 kids through different ways of doing it. You may not be the sex researcher that is doing the go-ahead on the transgender transitions, but he might be a sex psychiatrist who is telling parents that he needs to give boys therapy about their bodies, and he ends up jacking them off in their rooms, in his office. Like these are going to be real stories. And so I don't know how these same people, these same organizations can then just come back around 10 years later, and we've all been memory holed. But the memory hole required to get this whole thing started, as you're going to see after patient 1, what happened to patient 1 in the transgender, the first transgender transition, that's a memory hole to beat all memory holes. So let's let this guy finish talking here, and then we'll get started.
Seeing from my scrutiny of the literature a very positive, it was a very mixed record at best. And so I couldn't understand.
In many ways, like when one child dies, if that was a study for COVID vaccines, that would be the end of that COVID vaccine. It's a kind of open and shut. One has died. It hasn't worked. Arguably, let's pack up and go home.
Arguably. Let's go with this here. There he is. Okay, so I am going to tell you the story of the very first transgender patient, the very first child who was medically transitioned. The test case from which the research papers were written that facilitated the first 3,000 gender transitions. You'd think you probably heard this story before. It didn't happen that long ago. The doctor who I came up with this, and when I say doctor, I don't mean medical doctor, but there, that's his face right there. He just passed away a couple years ago. And when you think about Promethean events or origin stories, you know, there's something to the fact that they set a framework for how things are going to go in the future usually. And like that guy was just saying there, if you do a study of 70 kids, you get 50 results and one of them dies. That's just not a, whatever that is, it's not something that you're going to want to advance to the rest of the world. I mean, how important would it have to be that you're giving up the life of a kid, 2 kids out of 100 to do it? Like, it's that important to cut their genitalia off and to facilitate the transition from, I mean, what the hell are we even doing here? And as you're going to see, I'm not worried about like the nomenclature and all that shit. Like, I've been canceled, all that stuff. Like, just there's far more important things to worry about. So I will say though, and I said this on Twitter and stuff before, I think that supporting gender non-conforming kids is non-negotiable, because that's not a new thing. There's always been that. There's always been kids who don't fit in, you know, kids who have trouble in high school. It's a huge portion. It's like 30 or 35%, you know, and so there's been no failure of the kids. And to the kids, if there is, if there are kids who are transitioning or thinking about it, who are listening to this, you know, all I'd say to you is, hey, you have everything you need to be whatever it is you want to be already. And, you know, I think that you're strong and beautiful the way that you are. But if you need help, you should get it. And I would just say that what we're going to talk about here is that just because you might be having some difficulties in your life and need a little bit of assistance, that doesn't mean that the first 3 quacks who come through the door with scissors should be the guys giving it to you. Okay, and that's what we're going to talk about. There's this old joke about how, like, if you have your kids in Boy Scouts, right, and like the first time that there's going to be a weekend trip, the parents get together to decide who's going to take the troop. Well, whoever volunteers first, that guy's out, right? Like, and whoever says they don't want to do it, that's the guy who's going to do it. So, point being, like, if you've got kids who are having some issues with their body image, depression, puberty, gender, any of that stuff, the first 3 dudes running through the door saying, you know, come into my office, take off your pants, and let's start talking about sexuality, they may not be the ones that you want helping you. We haven't been real good about like gatekeeping that. And I'm hoping that we can get started now, because in point of fact, I'm going to cover this. We're going to get these stories out, and I'm going to give the benefit of the doubt to the school district, assume they didn't know this stuff yet, but this ship is really sailed. Everyone's going to see, like, the harm is clear, the benefits are nil, the lies are, you know, omnipresent. And so if people were duped before, well, we're going to know now, and it's time to like start cleaning up house. And the lawsuits have already started. I don't really care about that stuff. I just want, it'd be nice if Lake Stevens could be in the forefront of, not just Lake Stevens, the 425 schools could be in the forefront of getting the policy fixed, you know, so that we're not out there with these bullshit policies with the emotional blackmail and the lies about suicidality and all that kind of stuff, pushing kids towards these horrible outcomes. Like, you heard the example given, like a male to female transition ends with a surgery that cuts off a boy's penis and crafts a fake vagina. And this is such a new thing that even if there was people who thought that was going to give somebody a good life, there's not enough people far enough down the road to even say that. There's like one guy who got transitioned when he was like 5, and you can go see his interview. And he says, yeah, I think that I would have got transitioned anyways, but 5 was a little young. That's the best case that they can point out. The worst cases are they're dead, or horribly maimed. And it's just like, to what end is this going on? And the numbers just keep getting exponentially bigger, and the quackery is just out of control. And it's just like, I've struggled with it so much. I know I'm not being very eloquent, but I haven't slept well. Like, I had to get to the core information, so I couldn't be reading the Trevor Project bullshit and then the right-wing version of that and stuff. I go read the studies, and like to read 100 case studies of 100 kids who detransitioned after some horrible shit happened to them. It's super depressing because the images that you get are these families in total crisis. They don't know what to do. Something horrible has happened to a baby's genitalia or something like that. Parents are crying. No, but they need help. They need help. And what they get, some pseudoscientist probably just coming back from some Kinsey sex party where he's watching hermaphrodites do each other, and he wants to test out some theory that he's been betting his buddy about. And that's really like a caustic version of what often happens in these cases. These guys, they have theories that they want to test out on somebody's baby, and it's like almost every stereotype that you're told not to say turns out to be true. Dr. John Money, is he a pedophile? You bet your ass he is. You'll see. Sorry. Okay. So I'm going to start telling you a story. What do I need to do that? Oh, I got a comment here. Oh, thanks, Cheryl. Just got to find my notes. Okay. So we're going to talk about the origin story, the first case of a child that was transitioned. And I picked out a couple quotes here. I have entered on an enterprise which is without precedent and will have no imitator. I propose to show my fellows a man as nature made him, and this man shall be myself. That's Rousseau from Confessions. Second quote. The difficulty is to detach the framework of fact, of absolute undeniable fact, from the embellishments of theorists and reporters. Then, having established ourselves upon this sound basis, it is our duty to see what inferences may be drawn, and what are the special points upon which the mystery turns. Memoirs of Sherlock Holmes. So this picture here is Dr. John Money. In 1967, an anonymous baby boy was turned into a girl by doctors at Johns Hopkins Hospital. The case was reported as a medical triumph, proof that a child's gender identity, a term coined by Dr. Money, could be changed. The man behind this innovation opened some 50 surgery clinics in 24 months, which led to thousands of quote-unquote sex reassignments that were performed, usually on toddlers or babies, based on little more than the published celebration of his initial example. But his first case was actually a failure. The truth was hidden. The story of the first post-op transgender minor was misreported and then lost in the sociological onslaught that followed, as liberal society not only adopted but celebrated the concept that a child could be converted from one sex to another simply by hacking off its genitals and combining the post-op physical reality with some heavy social conditioning, and voila, healthy male baby becomes, as they termed it at the time, a homosexual female. Why that was what... The term transgender was quickly adopted instead, and before any studies whatsoever occurred, thousands of children were undergoing sex reassignment surgery at Johns Hopkins' network of gender identity clinics. At the time, there were, and this is a side note, at the time, these guys, Money and his colleagues, you know what, I'm just pause it right there. I need to back up and say one thing about why we're going down the course of Dr. John Money here. So I'm going to take you down two branches of the foundation of the modern transgender theory that informs the policy that are in our schools now. We're doing patient one, the first kid to get transitioned. And the other branch that we're going to do is something called the Dutch protocol. And that's the scientist that invented the chemical side of things. Or actually, it's a protocol where it was considered like the safest and the best, most cautious way of transitioning kids. It was celebrated as that, and it's a combination of psychiatry, of puberty blockers, and then eventually of surgery. And they've got years and years of doing it over in the Netherlands, and we're going to talk about that and what they've figured out from that as well. So, but today, right now, we're talking about John Money, and then we're going to leave off after this. So, the thing is, though, the man who came up with and carried out this concept, John Money, picture there, the guy who invented modern sexual reassignment surgery, as well as the term gender identity, well, he failed. He horribly scarred and ruined the first toddler that he castrated in furtherance of his transgender theory. When the toddler and his identical twin, the control, as Money thought of the boy, didn't take to the sex change, Money spent years attempting to condition the castrated boy into a girl through years of hands-on, direct psychological, physical, sexual abuse. Why? Because Money had already published the papers declaring the test case a phenomenal success. He had 50 clinics humming away and a couple thousand genital mutilations of children under his belt. He had to justify it. So when the abuse didn't work, Money just forgot about the failed experiment and his duty to the kids. He just wrote it up as a success, and he distributed his bullshit far and wide. So hungry was society for this innovation that no one asked for details or corroboration. Not until tens of thousands of innocents had gone under the knife. Hard to believe, but it's true. And while versions of the story still try and frame Money as the pioneer behind a accepted and necessary cure for an endemic childhood condition, the fact of the matter is even some of Money's colleagues at Johns Hopkins figured him out. They tried to speak up, but it was too late to change the public narrative. They did, however, padlock his clinics and halt the surgeries after several years. The department head at Johns Hopkins went so far as destroying the physical structure that housed the initial clinic, and it'd be 35 years before operations started again there. And in the meantime, the story came out. Rolling Stone told the true story of the horrific failures suffered by the transgender patient one and his family. In honor of Pride Month, we're going to tell you exactly when and how the modern transgender movement started. We'll tell you what happened, and you'll never hear a darker or more disturbing story. I'm not going to drop a last-second bomb on you either. There was 2 toddlers involved in the inception story for transgenderism. There was the boy who was transitioned and his identical twin. They both killed themselves. They both killed themselves. And Money rewrote it as a success. Money cut off the boy's penis and told him he was a girl. He changed his name to a female name. He abused him for years. He made the boy and his identical twin brother simulate sex in offices while Money and his colleagues watched. Wrote it up as experiments. And when the boy cracked and the sex assignment didn't take, he just shoved him aside. Lied. And they each took their lives. Sorry. Okay, I'm going to read this. This is the account of John Calypto, Rolling Stone author, December 11, 1997. In 1967, an anonymous baby boy was turned into a girl by doctors at Johns Hopkins. For 25 years, the case of John and Joan was called a medical triumph. But the case was a failure, the truth never reported. Now the man who grew up as a girl tells the story of his life, and a medical controversy erupts. This is December 11th, 1997. In late June 97, I arrive at an address in a working-class suburb in the North American Midwest. On the front lawn, a child's bicycle lies on its side. An 8-year-old secondhand Toyota is parked at the curb. Inside the house, a handmade wooden cabinet in the corner of the living room holds the standard emblems of family life. Wedding photos and school portraits, china figurines, and souvenirs from family trips. There's a knockoff antique coffee table, a well-worn easy chair, and a sofa, which is where my host, a wiry young man dressed in a jean jacket and scuffed work boots, seats himself. He's 31 years old, but could pass for a decade younger. Partly it's the sparseness of his beard, just a few blonde wisps that sprout from his jawline. Partly it's a certain delicacy to his prominent cheekbones and tapering chin. Otherwise, he looks and sounds exactly like what he is, a blue-collar factory worker. A man of high school education whose fondest pleasures are to do a little weekend fishing with his dad in the local river and to have a backyard barbecue with his wife and kids. Ordinarily a rough-edged and affable young man, he stops smiling when the conversation turns to his childhood. Then his voice, a bird baritone, takes on a tone of aggrievement and anger, or the pleading edge of someone desperate to communicate emotions that he knows his listener can only dimly understand. How well even he understands these emotions is not clear. When describing events that occurred prior to his 15th birthday, he tends to drop the pronoun I from his speech, replacing it with the more distancing you, almost as if he was speaking about someone else altogether else, which in a sense he is. It was like brainwashing, he is saying now as he lights a cigarette. I'd give just about anything to go to a hypnotist to black out my whole past, because it's torture. What they did to you in the body is sometimes not near as bad as what they did to you in the mind, with the psychological warfare in your head. He is referring to the extraordinary medical treatment he received after suffering the complete loss of his penis to a botched circumcision when he was just 8 months old. On the advice of experts at the renowned Johns Hopkins Medical Center in Baltimore, a sex change operation was performed on him, a process that involved clinical castration and other genital surgery when he was a baby, followed by 12 years of social, mental, and hormonal conditioning to make the transformation take hold in his psyche. The case was reported as an unqualified success, and he became one of the most famous, though unnamed, patients in the annals of modern medicine. It's a fame that derives not only from the fact that his medical metamorphosis was the first sex reassignment ever reported on a developmentally normal child, but also from a stunning statistical longshot that lent a special significance to the case. He was born an identical twin, and his brother provided the experiment with a built-in matched control, a genetic clone who, with penis intact, was raised as a male. The twins were reported to have grown into happy, well-adjusted children of opposite sex seemed unassailable proof of the primacy of rearing over biology in the differentiation of the sexes, and was the basis for the rewriting of textbooks in a wide range of medical disciplines. Pause. What he's saying there, the author is saying there, is that so what they were testing out on patient one basically was the idea that they believed that a baby was like a blank slate, that you could basically act as if it had no genital or either set of genitalia, and then surround it with the proper social cues, and it would become a boy or a girl based on that. So in other words, when he came across this baby that had lost his genitalia, he just figured, great, I'll just make whatever we need to make, tell the kid it's a boy or a girl, and tell everybody to just go with that, and that's how it will be, you know? And the fact that there was the identical twin there was he thought that was great, Dr. Money, because he could use that as proof that his experiment worked. So he'd already reached the end in his mind already, right? So like he was going to transition the baby who had the accident, he was going to turn that into a girl, and then his identical twin brother was going to live a normal life, and then they'd show that, like, you know, 2 male twins born males, well, one of them was turned into a girl, the other one stayed a boy. So obviously that would mean that Money's theory of nurture over nature was correct. And basically you can, gender is a social construct. He's the guy who came up with that term, right? And so he's trying to prove it here. He's not doing research. He's trying to prove what he wants it to be. I mean, for Dr. John Money, the medical psychologist who was the architect of the experiment, this case was to be the most publicly celebrated triumph of a 40-year career that recently earned him the accolade of one of the greatest sex researchers of the century. And even after this article would come out for another 15 years after 1997, he would still be celebrated. He's still cited. He's still cited in studies that are used to support the school district policy. But as the mere existence of this young man in front of me would suggest, the experiment was a failure. A fact revealed in March 1997 article in the Archives of Adolescent and Pediatric Medicine, authors Milton Diamond, a biologist at the University of Hawaii, and Keith Sigmundson, a psychiatrist from Victoria, British Columbia. They documented how the twin had struggled against his imposed girlhood from the start. The paper set off shockwaves in the medical circles around the world, generating furious debate about the ongoing practice of sex reassignment. A procedure more common than anyone might think. Again, this article is in 1997, so when he says that, that's... It also raised troubling questions about the way the case was reported in the first place, why it took almost 20 years for a follow-up to reveal the actual outcome. Think about that. Why did it take 20 years for anyone to check to see if the one case that was used as proof that they could cut up 3,000 babies, why did it take 20 years to even check and see if this guy even told the truth? It shows you that there's just this incredible rush to get to the end of the, but to what end? Like, why is it so important to turn a bunch of intact male babies into... The answers to these questions, fascinating for what they suggest about mysteries of sexual identity, also bring to light a 30-year rivalry between eminent sex researchers. A rivalry whose very bitterness not only dictated how this most unsettling of medical tragedies was exposed, but may, in fact, have been the impetus behind the experiment in the first place. In other words, Money wanted to show that he was right in this little ego battle he was having with another dude. They had different theories about how sexuality was determined in babies. Money saw an advantage to one-up dude. He took it. And, the tens of thousands of kids that have been maimed or killed since then. I'd say these guys are nihilists because it seems like they don't care about anything, but that wouldn't be true because they have this ego. I mean, it's like, I don't know, I just picture Marx, the picture of Marx where he's like standing there in the ashes of the building that's been burned down, and he's like, now our work can begin. They got to destroy everything. What for medicine has been a highly public scandal involving some of the biggest names in the world of sex research has been for the young man sitting in front of me a purely private catastrophe. And that's the key part of this. That's the key part for Lake Stevens, the key part for Washington, the key part for 425. Who cares about these guys and their academic bullshit? This kid, he had his life taken away from him. He had his body taken away from him. He had his bodily autonomy taken away from him. He was lied to, tricked, abused, and he killed himself. And we continue in his name. The policy at Lake Stevens School District right now says you can't question a kid who wants to transition. If you're a parent and you question it, then you're transphobe. You can be cut out of the process. It says that puberty blockers are good. It says that, it trots out the emotional blackmail of, the dead kid versus a transition kid, which is bullshit, by the way. There's more suicidality post-op than there is before. So that policy is still in place at the high school right now, or in the school district right now. I don't think there's any or a lot of that going on, though, at the high school. But the point being, like, if something's wrong, you fix it, If something's a lie, you don't say it. And this is a lie. This is one of the biggest lies in. This is going to be a story that is right up there with the Catholic Church scandal, with the still developing scandal of pedophilia in public schools. This will be up there with the Catholic Church scandal when this is all said and done, because of the sheer amount of casualties, and the casualties are all children, and because of the people who are carrying it out are all the worst kind of evil that at some level we all had to know that they were, because how many times could you hear somebody call them groomers offhand and then get dismissed? Like, that's the gut reaction, right? Like when these adult weirdos constantly need to get in their room with little boys. Returning to the article. So for this article, patient 1 granted more than 20 hours of candid interviews for the first time ever and signed confidentiality waivers giving exclusive access to a voluminous array of legal documents, therapist notes, child guidance, clinic reports, IQ tests, medical records, and psychological workups. He assisted me in obtaining interviews with his former therapists as well as with all of his family members, including his father, who, because of the painfulness of these events, had not spoken of them to anyone in more than 20 years. The young man's sole condition for talking to me was that I withhold some details of his identity. Accordingly, I will not reveal the city where he was born and raised. And I have agreed to invent pseudonyms for his parents, whom I will refer to as Frank and Linda. His sole sibling, the identical twin brother, I will call Kevin. The physicians in his hometown I will identify by initials. The young man himself will be referred to as John and Joan. These are the pseudonyms given to him by Diamond and Sigmundson, the two good guys, researchers, in the journal article describing the macabre double life he has been obliged to live. No other details have been changed. Quote, my parents feel very guilty, as if the whole thing was their fault, John says. But it wasn't like that. They did what they did out of kindness and love and desperation. And when you're desperate, you don't necessarily do all the right things. Let's take a quick break and hear from patient 1 himself. I've got a clip here.
And asked, Dr. Money did not cause David's death, but his family felt that he was partly responsible. Because Dr. Money had pursued his theory in the face of convincing evidence that the gender assignment had not worked, they felt that he had traumatized their son in childhood to the extent that he became suicidal as an adult.
I would like to say to Dr. Money, I would like to ask him if he could be man enough to admit to the public and to even to himself that he made a mistake. He was trying to make history and it wasn't working.
As it became clear that it wasn't working, he could not let go of the case. It was too beautiful for him to let go of it, and I think that was unethical behavior on his part.
Horizon asked Dr. Money to participate in this documentary, but he declined. His former student, Richard Green, argues that Dr. Money did the best he could in an era when we knew less.
With the benefit of hindsight, based on what we knew at the time about how you become male or female or boy or a girl, with the advantage of hindsight, knowing the difficulties, to say the least, of creating a penis surgically, the decision that John Money made at the time was the correct one, and I would have made the same one at that time.
What we do know is that Dr. Money's theory that it is possible to raise a boy as a girl does not seem to hold true for most children. Nature, as far as gender identity is concerned, cannot be overridden by nurture. Above all, this is a cautionary tale. This is what can happen when science pursues a beautiful theory with scant regard for the human cost.
You're always going to see people that are going to say, well, the Dave Reimer case could have been successful. I'm living proof. And if you're not going to take my word as gospel, because I have lived through it,
That's him.
who else are you going to listen to? Who else is there? I've lived through it.
Look at his eyes.
Is it going to take somebody to wind up killing themselves, shooting themselves in the head for people to listen?
Returning to what John was saying, my parents feel very, very guilty, as if the whole thing was their fault, but it wasn't like that. They did what they did out of kindness and love and desperation. When you're desperate, you don't necessarily do all the right things. They didn't know any better, to be fair to them. They really didn't. You trust the doctor. They got a baby who just had his penis ruined in a horrible accident, you know, like it must have been an awful, like they must have been grasping for any straw. Frank and Linda Thiessen's life together had begun with special promise. A young couple of rural religious backgrounds, they grew up on farms near each other and met when Linda was just 15 and Frank was 17. Linda, an exceptionally pretty brunette, had spent much of her teens fighting off guys who were, quote, too fresh. Frank, a tall, shy, fair-haired man, was different. I thought, well, he's not all hands, Linda recalls. I can relax with him. Not all hands, a low bar to cross for old Frank. 3 years later, at ages 18 and 20, they married and moved to a nearby city. Linda remembers Frank's joy soon after, upon learning that he was going to be the father of twins, and his euphoria when the brothers were born on August 22nd. The nurse asked him, is it boys or girls? Linda recalls, and he said, I don't know, I just know there's two of them. Shortly before the births, Frank had landed his highest paying job ever at a local unionized plant, and the couple now moved with their newborns into a sunny one-bedroom apartment on a quiet side street downtown. But when the twins were 7 months old, Linda noticed that their foreskins were closing, making it hard for them to urinate. The pediatrician explained the condition, said it wasn't rare, and said it was easily remedied by circumcision. He referred them to a surgeon. The circumcisions were scheduled for April 27th in the morning. Because Frank needed the family car to get to his job on the late shift, they brought the kids in the night before. We weren't worried, Linda says. We didn't know we had anything to worry about. It was just a circumcision. But early the next morning, they were jarred from sleep by a ringing phone. It was the hospital. There's been a slight accident, the nurse told Linda. The doctor needs to see you right away. In the children's ward, they were met by a surgeon. Grim-faced, businesslike. He told them that John had suffered a burn to his penis. Another way of saying that is, we fucked your kid over, but I guess he said it as John had suffered a burn to his penis. I like how he takes all the active responsibility out of it, huh? Linda remembers being shocked into numbness by the news. I sort of froze, she says. I didn't cry. It was just like I turned to stone. Eventually, she was able to gather herself enough to ask how their baby had been burned. The doctor seemed reluctant to give a full explanation. It would, in fact, can you just stop right there? I'm just trying to imagine being the dad there, and this guy is reluctant to give me a full explanation. Like, yeah, definitely going to jail. It would, in fact, be months before the Thiessens would learn that the injury had been caused by an electrocautery needle, a device sometimes used in circumcisions to seal blood vessels. What the hell were they doing? Through malfunction or doctor error or both, a surge of intense heat engulfed the baby. He was blackened. I'm going to just skip over some of this. It's just too much. Blackened, burnt, desiccated, nothing left, basically, is the end result for the poor little guy. Baby John, with a catheter where his penis used to be, remained in the hospital for several weeks while Frank and Linda watched as a parade of the city's top specialists examined him. Nobody had any hope, though. Phallic reconstruction, a crude and makeshift expedient even today, 1997, was new in the 1960s, and a fact made plain by the surgeon when he described the limitations that would be constructed from flesh farmed from John's thigh or abdomen. It would not resemble a normal organ in color, texture, or capability, he wrote in a report to the Thiessens. It would serve as a conduit for urine, but that is all. It's funny because that's about as far as they ever got with what they're still doing today. Even that was optimistic, according to a urologist. Insofar as the future outlook is concerned, restoration as a functional organ is out of the question. A psychiatrist summarized John's emotional future this way: he will be unable to consummate marriage or have normal heterosexual relations. He will have to recognize that he is incomplete and physically defective, and that he must live apart. Can you believe that? That's what a psychiatrist said to his parents. And I'm sure he read that too. I'm going to repeat that. He will be unable to consummate marriage or have normal heterosexual relations. He will have to recognize that he is incomplete, physically defective, and that he must live apart. Well, let's talk for a second about what he still had. He still was a human boy, you know, with a conscience, a soul, a spirit. He also still had his testicles, so he was capable of reproduction. He could be a father. He was still a brother and a son. You know, sex isn't everything. They talk about him there like he was, yeah, you heard it. Must live apart. This wasn't that long ago. It's just crazy the way these people in this business act. Now desperate, Frank and Linda took baby John on a day-long train to the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota, where he was examined by a team of doctors who merely repeated the dire prognosis. Back home, with nowhere to turn, the couple sank into a state of mute depression. Months passed, during which they couldn't speak of John's injury even to each other. Imagine how you'd feel. Twin babies, twin boys, so excited. And then out of nowhere, this. And the guilt you must feel for the pain and the poor guy. Then one evening in December 1966, some 7 months after the accident, they saw a TV program that jolted them from their despondency. On their small black and white television screen appeared a man identified as John Money. Let's get his little face up here again.
To Money.
A suavely charismatic and handsome individual in his late 40s. Are we looking at the same guy? Guess the bar was pretty low for suave and charismatic, huh? Bespectacled with sleekly brushed back hair, Dr. Money was speaking about the wonders of gender transformation taking place at the Johns Hopkins Medical Center, where he was a medical psychologist. Also on the program was a woman, one of the satisfied post-operative transsexuals who had recently been converted at Johns Hopkins. Today, with the subject of transsexualism a staple of daytime talk shows, it's difficult to imagine just how alien the concept seemed on that December evening. 14 years earlier, a spate of publicity had attended the announcement of ex-American GI George Jorgensen that he'd undergone transformation to become Christine. But that operation, performed in Denmark, had been criticized by American doctors who refused to perform surgeries. The subject had faded from view until now, when Johns Hopkins announced that it not only performed 2 male-to-female sex changes, a first in America, but also established the world's first gender identity clinic. So you're going to see on Wikipedia and stuff, people will try to rebut the fact that John Money came up with the term gender identity. Here's just a general clue. Anytime you see a negative page on Wikipedia, something that says like the myth of Irish slaves, or gender identity was not, John Money did not invent gender identity. You just assume that whatever they're trying to counter is true. So they invented the gender identity clinic, devoted to the practice of converting people from one sex to another. Along with gynecologist Howard Jones, the driving force behind Hopkins' pioneering work in the study and treatment of transsexuals was the man on the television screen, John Money. Let me tell you just real quickly as an aside how old John Money here got involved in the business of transitioning people. So it was the time McKinsey, the sex researcher, was into some really wild shit. Basically sexual attractions to anything that doesn't have a heartbeat. anything that isn't human, they like to study that. And then any other sorts of deviancies for money. Like, he was the kind of guy that never had girlfriends. He was raised by his mom and his aunt, and he was constantly guilted about being a boy. He didn't have a lot of confidence, and I think he used his academic privilege to talk about and have access to a sexual community that kind of stood in for the lack of sex that occurred in his regular life. And he really liked studying the real fringe stuff. I'll just put it that way. So, you know, whatever you think is fringe today is probably even more fringe in the 60s, right? During the sexual revolution. So, long story short, he comes back from a sex party where he'd been watching hermaphrodites go at it. Hermaphrodites was the term he used. What it means is naturally occurring but very rare phenomenon of people who are born with portions of both sex organs. He was fascinated by that, and then he found out that there were some intersex individuals, as they're called, at Johns Hopkins that were receiving treatment, and he started betting his buddy that you could kind of just pick one of the, penis or vagina and cut the other one off or whatever, and then just like dress them up as a girl or a boy, and they'd be that. And that was his theory. And so basically what he'd do is he'd go take a look at them, and if he thought their penis was too small, he'd say they couldn't be a boy, and he'd have that cut off. That's as scientific as it got. Swear to God. He was saying that it could be that babies are born neutral and you can change their gender. Something told me that I should get in touch with this Dr. Money. That's the mom speaking. Remember, she's like grasping at straws. So when this guy comes on and says a baby can be anything, I mean, that's a rope to the parents, right? Because he's lost his penis. Like, if they're saying that he could be a boy or a girl or anything, it would be great at that point, right? Like, especially if you believe in this stuff and it seems like a dawn of a new age, and you believe anything is possible, I guess. Dr. Money responded promptly. She says in a letter he expressed great optimism about what could be done for her baby at Johns Hopkins and urged her to bring John to Baltimore without delay. He also happened to inquire, Linda says, about the twin brother whom she'd mentioned in passing. By the way, are they identical twins? She informed him that they were. Dr. Money replied that he'd like to run a test on the babies at Johns Hopkins, just to make sure. Sure, buddy. After so many months of grim predictions, bleak prognoses, and hopelessness, Dr. Money's words, Linda said, felt like a balm. Someone, she says, was finally listening. Dr. Money was indeed listening, but then Linda's cry for help was one that he might have been waiting for his entire professional life. At the time the Thiessen's family's plight became known to Dr. Money, he was already one of the world's most respected, if controversial, sex researchers. I'm going to kind of skip over this. I've told you what he was up to. I gave you the short version of it, but it's correct. According to one of his colleagues, Money's ability to persuade others to adopt his point of view was his chief strength. He's a terribly good speaker, very organized, and very persuasive in his recital of the facts. Indeed, Hampton admitted that Money is almost too good at the art of persuasion. I think a lot of people are envious. He's kind of a charismatic person, and some people dislike him. As a person, he was a little bit flamboyant. He might have been a little bit glib. Money's overweening confidence actually came to him at some cost. And then it talks about how he was raised by his mom and his aunts, bullied by the neighborhood girls, couldn't fight for shit. Basically says that it's so hard being a boy that he thought that people should be gelded. A weirdo. Now it's just going through all the weird sex shit that he liked watching and hanging out with Kinsey and them, so I'm just skipping over that. It's not. Here we go. Indeed, by the mid-70s, with the sexual revolution in full rampage, Money would step out publicly as a champion of open marriage, nudism, pedophilia, and the dissemination of explicit pornography. Pedophilia. His promotion of the culture's sexual unbuttoning seemed boundless. There is plenty of evidence that bisexual group sex can be as personally satisfying as a paired partnership, provided each partner is tuned in on the same wavelength, he wrote in his 1975 pop psych book, Sexual Signatures. It's funny how his book is pop psych, but when he writes it about the twins, right, like it's scientific research. A former patient who was treated by Money in the 70s for a rare endocrine disorder recalls the psychologist once casually asked him if he'd ever had a, quote, golden shower. The patient, a sexually inexperienced youth at the time, okay, so catch that. He's asking a kid patient, a minor patient that's getting endocrinological work done, if the kids had a golden shower before. The patient, an inexperienced youth at the time, did not know what Money was talking about. Quote, getting pissed on, Money said, with the twinkling, slightly insinuating little smile with which he delivered such deliberately provocative comments to a kid. I mean, how could they tell he's a pedophile? It was really tough. According to colleagues and other former patients, such sexual frankness in conversation was a hallmark of his personal style. This guy is just real classy. One of his mentors said that Money was aggressively outspoken because he thinks it's important to desensitize people in discussing sexual issues. That's why he uses four-letter words that others might find offensive, says Berlin. Perhaps he could be a little more willing to compromise on that. But John is an opinionated person who isn't looking necessarily to do the things differently from the way he's concluded is best. But while Money's conclusions about the best approach to sexual matters merely raised eyebrows in the mid-70s, by the 1980s, he was getting more raised eyebrows. In an April 14th, 1980 article in Time, Money was criticized for his endorsement of incest and pedophilia. Oh, really? They criticized him for that. A childhood sexual experience, such as being the partner of a relative or of an older person, need not necessarily affect the child adversely, Money told Time. Okay, so let's just stop there. We haven't got to everything this guy's going to do, but again, we're going over the first example of a child being transitioned from one gender to the next. We're learning about the guy who pioneered this, and the reason we're doing this is because this was put into policy at Lake Stevens schools and the other 425 schools that transitioning is something to be celebrated. It's something that is not to be interfered with. It's something that is scientifically proven, and it's something that if you don't do, the kid is likely to kill themselves. There's nothing about the fact that the whole thing was a lie carried out by a crazy pedophile. They don't mention that. Wonder why. Let's repeat his quote here. A childhood sexual experience, such as being the partner of a relative need not necessarily affect the child adversely. If I were to see the case of a boy aged 10 or 12 who's intensely attracted toward a man in his 30s, if the relationship is totally mutual and the bonding is genuine, I would not call it pathological in any way, Money wrote. So this is in the Rolling Stone article, 1997. We haven't even got to the abuse that he does to the kids, but he's writing that he's a pedophile. He's advocating for it. He is still celebrated as the godfather of gender identity and of transitioning well into the 20 teens, like well into it. And, you know, as much as like it's a knee-jerk response for a right-wing person to just say groomer anytime somebody starts talking about trans stuff, you know? Well, this is why. Cliches are like cliches for a reason. Money's response to criticism has been to launch counterattacks of his own, lambasting his adoptive country for a puritanical adherence to sexual taboos. We are the least puritanical now. We're the furthest out on this gender transition stuff, but if we are too puritanical about not letting 30-year-old uncles have sex with 12-year-old boys, then I guess he should just go back to wherever he's from. Well, he's dead now, but... Money described himself as a missionary of sex and points out with a defiant pride that it has not been easy for society to change as it had been for me to find my own emancipation. It has not been as easy for society to change as it had been for me to find my own emancipation. Money's experimental taboo-breaking approach to sex was paralleled in his professional career. Like I told you, total whack job in his personal life carries over into work. Eschewing the well-traveled byways of sex research. Another way of saying that is skipping over the scientific and proven portions of his job. Money sought out exotic corners of the field where he could be a pioneer. He found just such a relatively undiscovered realm of human sexuality while studying psychology at Harvard. Now it gets into the intersex and hermaphrodite stuff. I told you about that. We're going to skip forward on that. During his work on the intersex children and adults, the hermaphrodites, Money claimed to have observed a striking fact about people. So listen to how that's phrased. The key findings that he uses to facilitate his surgery on John Joan and to prove out the case that is still followed today is based off something that he, quote, claimed to have observed while watching other people treat intersex people. He claimed to have observed a striking fact that those diagnosed with identical genital ambiguities and chromosomal makeups, but who had been raised as members of the opposite sex, more than 95% of these intersexes fared equally well psychologically. So he's saying that 95% of the cases where he'd seen an intersex person raised as the opposite of what they were born, that it turned out just fine. He's just saying that. He doesn't have proof, but he's just saying it. To Money, this was the proof that the primary factor that determined a child's gender identity was not biology, but the way the child was raised. He concluded that these children were born psychosexually undifferentiated, in other words, a mold of clay, or a clay that could be molded. This theory was the foundation on which Money based his recommendation to pediatric surgeons that they surgically and hormonally stream intersex newborns into whichever sex the doctors wished. Such surgeries could range from cutting down enlarged female genitalia on mildly intersexual girls to performing full sex reversals on boys born with testicles but a penis deemed too small. So I hinted at this earlier. His scientific work on these intersexual infants, hermaphrodites, he would look and see if he thought their penis was too small, and if so, he would cut it off and raise them as a girl. Same if he thought like portions of the female genitalia were unattractive to him. That's the judgment call that he's making. The only thing that he said the doctor could choose whichever sex they wanted. They just needed to do it as early as possible. And that once the sex was decided on, doctors and parents must never waver in their decision for fear of introducing ambiguity into the child's mind. In other words, you determine which sex you're going to make the kid be, you do your snipping, and then you give it a name, and then you raise them in that gender, and nobody says anything else, and everything turns out fine. And again, this isn't just going with whatever the kid is, right? He's talking about this is how you change. This is how you change kids' gender. In terms of the possible nerve destruction caused by the amputation of genital appendages, Money assured doctors that according to studies he had conducted, there is no evidence of loss of sensation. He didn't conduct any of these studies. He just didn't. Money's protocols for the treatment of intersexual children hold to this day. So there you go. They still, in 1997, they were still citing his intersex children treatment stuff. Let's see. The vast majority, because of Money's recommendations, the vast majority of intersexual children, regardless of their chromosome status, would be turned into girls. They all had small penises. They're babies. Current guidelines dictate that to be assigned as a boy, this is his clinical guidelines, the child must have a penis longer than 2.5 centimeters. That's the scientific guideline, not the chromosomes. So that's the kind of work this guy was doing. Can you believe that, like, they're betting people's lives on this? They talk about what a hero Money was to the parents of intersex kids who, you know, when they asked, is it a boy or a girl? And the results and the response from the doctor that says, oh, we're just not really that sure, you know, for intersex kids, like what a hero it was that he could just walk in and take control of the situation, be definitive about it. And his colleagues are saying that that was really, you know, loved by the parents of intersex kids. I can understand that, you know. He was not interested solely in the hermaphrodites, though. He saw them as a way of learning about sexual development that he could try on quote-unquote normal humans. Thus, he immediately generalized his theories learned through the intersexes to include all children, even those born without irregularities. So he's just applying whatever he saw, which are already rash generalizations, but the things he saw in the intersex kids, he just assumes that's true for everything, and he's applying it forward on other kids without evidence. He's going to find that evidence out, right? Yeah. The evidence in my studies lends support to a conception that sexuality is undifferentiated at birth and that it becomes differentiated in the course of the experience of growing up. So he's saying X, Y, XX don't matter. Saying penis, vagina doesn't matter. You could sub them out. See, he's very unconcerned with anybody ever having a kid, or having a family. All he thinks about is the size of a penis. In a retrospective essay written in 1985, Money offered crucial insight into the way he arrived at his unusual theories of human sexual behavior. I find myself toying with concepts and working out hypotheses. It is like playing a game of science fiction. It is much an art as the creative process in painting, music, drama, or literature. Can you believe he said that? And they let him keep working on people, on babies? He said that, and we were still using his research like now? I find myself toying with concepts and working out potential hypotheses. It is like playing a game of science fiction. It is much an art as the creative process in painting, music, drama, or literature. He's talking about transition. We're still doing transition today. Imagine how offensive that sentence is to somebody who is deeply Christian, for instance. This guy here, that they're told by the school district policy that you just got to accept that, what he said, and you got to celebrate it. Money's theories were unorthodox and against the current climate of science, but his colleagues didn't say so publicly. His papers outlining his theory made all of them famous and were helping to propel all of them to international renown. By 1965, the year of the twins' birth, Money's reputation was unassailable. He had for a decade been the head of Hopkins' Psychohormonal Research Unit, the clinic for treating and studying intersex kids, and he was shortly to co-found the Gender Identity Clinic. A coup that helped him earn a reputation as the national authority on gender disorder and the guy who was able to coin all the terms that we still use today. There was, however, one researcher willing to question Money. He was a young graduate student at the University of Kansas, Milton Diamond. And he'll follow along from a distance and be trying to check on him the whole time. So we'll check back in with Milton a little bit. It was a year and a half after Diamond had thrown down the gauntlet that So Diamond basically challenged Money and said that, you know, your theories are pseudoscientific bullshit. All you're doing is you're walking in there and you have something in your head that you saw at a sex party or something, and you just want to carry out your experiments on people like they're, you know, like they're inanimate objects for you to mess around with. And his colleague was right, but Money was motivated to prove that he was right in his theories. So the Thesons made their first trip to Johns Hopkins in 1967. Within weeks of seeing Money on TV, the young couple were awestruck by the medical center dominating the top of a rise on Wolf Street. Money's Psychohormonal Research Unit was located in a gloomy Victorian building tucked away in a courtyard. Money's own inner sanctum was furnished with a couch, oriental rugs, and potted plants. reminding Frank of a living room. There is also a collection of carved Aboriginal sculptures of erect penises, vaginas, and breasts. Nice. I looked up to him like a god, says Linda, the mother, who at the time was not yet out of her teens. Oh my God, I didn't realize that. So the twins' mom is 19. I accepted whatever he said, and what Dr. Money had to say was exactly what the Thesons wanted to hear. In his many published versions of the first interview, Money has recounted how he spelled out to the young couple the advantages of the sex reassignment for baby John, using non-technical words, diagrams, and photographs of children who had been reassigned. What is not clear from Money's accounts is whether Linda and Frank, whose educations at the time did not go beyond 6th grade, understood that such a procedure was in fact purely experimental. Now, again, this was written in 1997. We later find out that they didn't understand that it was experimental, that he pitched it as something that had been tested, that he knew the outcome of, very much like the way that, the stuff is positioned today, very confidently telling you that this is how it is. So they didn't know that it had never been done before. Today, or in 1997, Frank and Linda said that this was a distinction they didn't grasp. The crucial point they gleaned from Money was his conviction that the procedure would succeed. I see no reason that it won't work, Linda recalls him saying. If Dr. Money seemed to be in a hurry, he was. He explained to Frank and Linda that they would have to make up their minds quickly. For according to one of the finer points of his theory, gender identity gate closed quickly. He told the parents that the gate closes a little after 2 years. John was now 17 months. The child was still young enough so that whichever assignment was made, erotic interest would almost certainly direct itself towards the opposite later on, Money wrote. But the time for reaching a decision was now. Frank and Linda, however, needed time to decide on something as momentous as having their child undergo a surgical sex change. They went home to think about it. Linda said that Dr. Money made no secret of his impatience with the delay. He wrote 2 letters saying they're procrastinating, and he called every day. Back home, they canvassed opinions. They talked to their pediatrician, who recommended against it. Their parents recommended against it, and so did their clergy. But Frank and Linda, realizing that they alone had to decide, they're the ones who were changing the baby's diaper every day. They're the ones who had to live with the reality of his injury. And they believed Money, so they made up their minds. And you know the answer. So 5 months after their first meeting with Money, they returned to Baltimore. Now 22 months old, the child was still within the window that Money had established as safe for an infant sex change. And so on July 3rd, 1967, the baby underwent surgical castration. So this just goes from bad to worse for the little guy, right? Like, he's born with a little bit of a condition that requires the late circumcision. Somehow, getting ready for the circumcision, the doctor burns his penis off. And now he's castrated, meaning that they cut his testicles off. It gets pretty descriptive about how they cut what's left of him and leave portions of it there for future reconstruction, but I'm not going to get into it. Let's just understand that they cut off his reproductive organs and left some extra skin and tissue there so that after the time of puberty had come and gone, they would be able to craft female genitalia, or so they say. Super sad. Just skipping through the details of them describing that. Let's see. Central to Money's program for reassignment was his edict that children, when very young, know nothing of their ambiguous sexual status at birth. Money put the same stricture into effect in this case. He told us not to talk about it, Frank says. Don't tell Joan the whole truth, and she shouldn't know she wasn't a girl. So, as you can see, they've changed pronouns. They've changed the name from John to Joan, and the twin brother is too young to realize what's going on. They're 22 months. So this is the kids aren't gonna know, right? They're just gonna grow up the way they grow up. They won't remember any of this. It was shortly before Joan's second birthday when Linda first put her in a dress. It was a pretty lacy dress. She was ripping at it, trying to tear it off. I remember thinking, oh my God, she knows she's a boy and she doesn't want girls' clothing. She doesn't want to be a girl. But then I thought, well, maybe I can teach her to want to be a girl. Maybe I can train her so that she wants to be a girl. It's just the first dress, dude. Calm down. Linda and Frank did their best to do just that. When Joan's brother, Kevin, at age 4, was watching Frank shave and asking to shave too, Frank gave him an empty razor and some shaving cream. But when Joan also clamored for a razor, Frank refused. I told her that girls don't shave. I told her girls don't have to. Linda offered to put makeup on her, but Joan didn't want to wear makeup. I remember saying, oh, can I shave too? John says of this incident, which forms his earliest childhood memory. So his first childhood memory is 4 years old, wanting to shave as his brother pretends shaves, his dad shaves, and they're saying, no, go with your mother. He remembers crying, and he says that the incident was typical of the way their parents tried to steer them into opposite sexes and how he felt it was doomed. I recognize Joan as my sister, Kevin says, as the twin brother, but she never, ever acted the part. She'd get a skipping rope for a gift, and the only thing we'd use that for was to tie people up and whip people with it. Never used it for what it was bought for. She played with my toys, Tinker toys, dump trucks, guns. Toys like this sewing machine, she just got it and sat where it was. Today, with the twins having rejoined each other on the same side of the gender divide, the stark physical differences between them eerily testify to all that John has been through. So, at the time of the interview in 1997, the two twins are on the porch here with the author, and he's remarking at how different they look and how tortured John has been by what he's gone through. At 32, Kevin is a dark-bearded, bear-like man with thickly muscled arms and shoulders of a manual laborer. To see him standing alongside his scarecrow-thin, scantily bearded brother, you would never guess that every cell in their bodies bears identical DNA until you compare their eyes, noses, and mouths, which are indistinguishable. As children, their physical differences were, if less pronounced, equally deceptive. Photographs of them as preschoolers show a puppy-eyed little boy with a crew cut and a slim, brown-eyed girl with wavy chestnut hair, framing a face of delicate prettiness. I think I've got that picture here. Let's see. When I say there was nothing feminine about Joan, Kevin laughs, I mean there was nothing feminine. She walked like a guy. She talked about guy things. She didn't give a crap about cleaning house, getting married, wearing makeup. We both wanted to play with guys, build forts, get in fights, have snowball fights, play army. Enrolled in Girl Scouts, Joan was miserable. I remember making daisy chains and thinking, if this is the most exciting thing in Girl Scouts, fuck it. John says, I kept thinking of the fun stuff my brother was doing over in Cubs. Linda and Frank were troubled by Joan's masculine behavior, but they'd been told by Dr. Money that they must not entertain any doubts about their daughter, and they felt that to do so would only increase the problem. Instead, Frank and Linda seized on those moments when Joan's behavior could be construed as somewhat feminine. She could be sort of feminine, sometimes, Linda said, when she wanted to please me. She'd be less rough, keep herself clean and tidy, and help a little bit in the kitchen. In her letters to Dr. Money describing Joan's progress, Linda made sure to emphasize those moments so that the psychologist would know that she and Frank were doing everything they could to implement his plans. Meanwhile, Linda comforted herself thinking of her daughter as a tomboy. I've seen all kinds of women in my life, she says, and some of them you'd swear they were men, so I thought, well, maybe it won't be a problem because there are lots of women who aren't very effeminate. It could work. I wanted it to work. Kevin, meanwhile, didn't question his sister's boyish ways until they went off to school. I was in grade 1 or 2, he says, and I saw all the other girls doing their thing, combing their hair, holding their dolls. Joan was not like that at all. At the time, Joan had voiced the ambition to be a garbage man at 6. She'd say, easy job, good pay. Who says that when they're 6, huh? She was 6 or 7 years old. Easy job, good pay, garbage man. I thought it was kind of bizarre. My sister, garbage man? Indeed, Kevin would finally grow perplexed with his sister's unconventional behavior, so to the point that he went to his mother about it. Well, that's Joan being a tomboy, because remember, Kevin doesn't know about the surgery, doesn't know about the accident, doesn't know that his sister is actually his brother, right? So he's noticing these things, and he's going to mom saying, what's up with my sister? And mom says, well, that's Joan being a tomboy. And I accepted that, Kevin says and shrugs. That's all he knew. That he thought that was his twin sister. It was not an explanation that Joan's schoolmates were prepared to accept, though. This is interesting. Somehow the kids know, the little kids know that Joan is not a girl, which is weird because hadn't gone through puberty yet, didn't have male genitalia, was being raised as a girl. Brother thinks it's his sister, but they are on him. Upon entering kindergarten, she became the object of instant ridicule from classmates, both male and female. As you'd walk by, they'd giggle. John remembers not one, but the whole class. It'd be like that every day. The whole school would make fun of you about one thing or another. I just think, like, the kid had been so scarred, right? Like, by life and by the doctor that, like, he just had an X on him, maybe. I don't know. They were cruel, says Kevin about his brother's treatment, who witnessed, well, his sister, witnessed his sister's humiliation at school. They teased her every day. It wasn't a weekly thing or a monthly thing. This was a daily thing. They'd call her names, ignore her, not involve her in the groups. You may be thinking, well, you should have stood up for her, but to be fair, we're talking about kindergarten here, you know? So it started the first day of kindergarten, and Linda says even the teacher didn't accept her. What? The teachers knew there was something wrong with her. That's fucked up. But then Joan also knew there's something different about her. But she didn't know what. God. You know generally what a girl is like, John says. You know generally what a guy is like. And everyone is telling you that you're a girl, but you say to yourself, I don't feel like a girl. You think girls are supposed to be delicate and like girl things like tea parties, things like that, but I like to do guy stuff. It doesn't match. So I figure, well, there's something wrong here. If I'm supposed to be like this girl over here, but I'm acting like this guy, I guess I gotta be in it. That's fascinating, isn't it? Like, he's a kindergartner or first grader. He doesn't know what's happened to him. All he knows is he's him. He has a little bit of a different, genitalia than his brother. They probably noticed that, and when I say he's him, he just knows he thinks he's a twin sister. That's it. But he knows there's something wrong by first grade. It's very strange. It's strange that the kids recognize it too. Because I'm just coming back to the fact that he didn't know, so like he wouldn't have been acting off, right? Like he wasn't trying to hide anything. He just didn't know. Like nobody knew other than the adults, the parents. Joan's personal difficulties were even obvious in her functioning in the classroom. Tests showed that she was in the normal intelligence range, but she was unable or unwilling to master the skills required in kindergarten, which aren't much. The school threatened to hold her back. Linda complained to Dr. Money. He wrote a letter to the school, urging that Joan, despite her difficulties, be promoted to first grade, but her problems only got worse. A few weeks after she started first grade, her behavior prompted a teacher to file a report with the district's child guidance clinic. The teacher noted that Joan does everything opposite of anything the other children do. The girl is very negativistic. It was at a 1972 meeting of the American Association for the Advancement of Science in Washington, D.C. that John Money unveiled for the first time his twins case. So, parallel to his patient having some pretty big difficulties coming out in kindergarten, he's in D.C. drinking on this success. Time magazine ran a full-page story on the debut on the cover, which happened to coincide that same week with the release of Money's book, Man, Woman, Boy, Girl. What a coincidence, huh? His book, Man, Woman, Boy, Girl, contained the first written account of the extraordinary twins case. The book made mention of Joan's tomboyish traits in passing, but focused on the way in which she had conformed to the stereotypes of female behavior, examples of which were culled from Linda's hopeful cataloging or outright invented. One thing that really amazes me is that she is so feminine, he wrote. No mention was made of the problems Joan had been having in school to that point. In fact, Money portrayed the experiment as an unqualified success. A conclusion bolstered by what Money pointed out was an extreme unusualness to the case, and he's referring, of course, to the control of the male twin, whose interest in cars and gas pumps and tools and hammers was contrasted to his sister's interest in dolls and macaroons, a dollhouse, and a doll carriage. He's just making shit up. The significance of the case to the then burgeoning women's movement was obvious, since feminists had been arguing against a biological basis for sex difference for years. Indeed, Money's own papers from the 50s on the total psychosexual flexibility of newborns were cited by Kate Mellett in her best-selling seminal feminine text, Sexual Politics. Money's new case buttressed the feminist claim that the observable differences in taste, attitudes, and behaviors of men and women are attributable solely to cultural expectations. Notice how everybody has their own agendas, and they are so quick to just build off of a little child to prove their own adult sexual points. This dramatic case, Time reported, provides strong support for a major contention of a women's liberationist that the conventional patterns of masculine and feminine behavior can be altered. It also casts doubt on the theory that major sexual differences, psychological as well as anatomical, are immutably set by the genes at conception. This is Time, front page, and then repeated in the New York Times book review. They're drawing these global conclusions about a state-of-the-art procedure, and he lied about the whole thing. Like, none of it is even real, and nobody checks it. The New York Times book review hailed Money's work as the most important volume in the social sciences since Kinsey. Money had produced the real answers to the ancient question, is it heredity or environment? It was the hallmark case, says Dr. William Reiner, a child psychologist at Johns Hopkins. It was the hallmark because it was followed up and written up a number of times by Money, and then essentially was the source of his statements. There you go. So he wrote himself up and then wrote himself up again, sourced himself, and then subsequently sourced himself in statements of any pediatric textbooks in endocrinology, urology, surgery, and psychology. So basically, this goes everywhere. It becomes the underlayment for everything having to do with gender reassignment surgery. That's why, like, part of the reason why he was never, disentangled from the research. Like, they probably couldn't do it, but like, you'd think that once he was found out he was a pedophile and that he lied about everything, that he would just be disappeared. He's not. Money's not. Like, he still gets credit. He's still cited. He should. I mean, I think that the fact that he lied and his patients killed themselves and that he was a pedophile means that we shouldn't use anything that he did, but like, effective immediately. Once confined principally to Johns Hopkins, Money's procedure soon spread, and as of 1997 was performed in virtually every major country with the possible exception of China and India, based off the instructions he provided in his seminal papers. So the whole world was following his bullshit. No annual tally of infant sex reassignments had ever been made, but Reiner guesses that there was about 1,000 reassignments per year. In the 25 years since Money's twin case was first published, they believe that as many as 35,000 similar sex reassignments may have been performed off the basis of his paper, off the basis of his lie. 35,000. And remember, this isn't like they're doing it today. They were doing those on babies, and they're doing it for stupid shit like, oh, his penis is probably too small, let's hack it off. So that's the first cohort, is little toddlers and babies. going under the knife based on a pseudoscientific pedophiles science fiction game that on top of which he lied about the results of. That's what this is all based off of. That's the foundation for this house of cards. There's no way to get around it because there's no reinvention of it. Like, money is not separated from it. It doesn't, like, there's no clean start, you know? It all grows out from this. Dr. Mel Grumbach, a pediatric endocrinologist at Berkeley and the world authority on the subject, circa 1997, confirms that Money's twins case is the decisive factor in the widespread acceptance of the practice. Doctors were very influenced by the twin experience. John Money stood up at a conference and said, "I've got these two twins, and one of them is now a girl and the other is a boy." They were saying they took this normal boy and changed him to a girl. That's powerful. That's really powerful. I mean, what is your response to that? How about, can I see some proof? This case was used to reinforce the fact that you can really do anything. You can take an XY and convert it into a female in the neonatal period. It doesn't make any difference. John Money is a major figure, and when he says he gets handed, and what he says gets handed down and accepted as gospel. Unbelievable. By everybody except for his rival, Mickey Diamond, who's still at Hawaii following the case from a distance. He's a little pissed that Money's become the most famous sexologist in the world, but yeah, he's still monitoring it. In 1967, at the time of John's castration, 2-year-old, Money stipulated that he needed to see the child once a year for counseling. The trips, though, were separated sometimes by as much as 18 months, and whereas Money put it in his letter to the Thiessen's lawyer, meant to guard against the psychological hazards associated with growing up as a sexually assigned child. So point here is that he's like put it into their agreement that he gets to see them every year until they're majority, until they're 18. But according to Thiessen's and the contemporaneous clinical notes, the trips to the psychohormonal research unit at Johns Hopkins exacerbated the confusion, fear, and dread that Joan was suffering. Okay, this is going to ramp up and we're going to call it a day here, but this is where it gets bad and interesting. So every year when they're coming back and Joan is going from being a toddler who doesn't know what's up to being 4, 5, 6, 7. She was already acting out, right, in school, already feeling like something was off. Well, every time she goes back to Johns Hopkins to see this weirdo, it triggers something in her. You get the idea something happened to you, John says, at those mysterious annual visits to the unit, which he doesn't know why he's going to. But you don't know what, and you don't even want to know. Let me repeat that quote. You get the idea that something happened to you, but you don't know what, and you don't want to know. It's an innocent kid. Like, they did this to him. And that's the feeling. He's so good at describing it. Kevin was also required on each visit to submit to sessions with Dr. Money, and he found the trips equally bewildering and unsettling. For the life of me, I couldn't understand why, out of all the kids in my class, why am I the only one going with my sister to Baltimore to talk to this doctor all the time? It made us feel like we were aliens. The twins developed a conviction that everyone from their parents to Dr. Money and his colleagues were keeping something from them. There was something not adding up, Kevin says. We knew that at a very early age, but we didn't make the connection. We didn't know. All they did know was that from the time they were 6 years old, Dr. Money wanted to talk to them, both singly and then together, about subjects that, as Joan would later complain to an outside therapist, I can't even talk to my mom about. So they're 5 and 6 years old. And Dr. Money would ask me, "Do you ever dream of having sex with women?" This is Money talking to a 6-year-old. He'd say, "Do you ever get an erection?" to the boy. And the same with Joan. "Do you think about sex? Do you think about that?" Except he'd use the 4-letter version. So he's asking 6-year-old kids, "Do you think about fucking?" While attempting to probe the twins' sexual psyches, Money also tried his hand at programming. Okay. He tried his hand at programming. One of his theories of how children form their different gender schemes was that they must understand at an early age the differences between male and female sex organs. This is another, some people might call this grooming. Pornography, he believed, was ideal for this purposes. We're 6 years old. Kids are 6 years old. Explicit sexual pictures, he wrote in his book, can and should be used as part of a child's sex education. Such pictures, he said, reinforce his or her own gender identity and gender role. So there are those terms again, right? And these terms are like, they are unquestionable. Like they are something that the people who are part of the trans community and advocates of this, like they define these in the first handout they give you, and they tell you you're not to argue with their conclusions, and then it's all written in stone, right? Just remember that that's how they feel about these terms. Keep that in mind when you're learning the other things that these terms were used to justify. Okay, if that makes sense. So if you're going to accept, the things that you like that are done in your name, you got to take responsibility for for everything that happens in your name. I guess what I'm saying. Back to 6-year-old Kevin. He would show us pictures of kids, boys and girls with no clothes on. Okay, so he's showing the 6-year-olds other child pornography that he has. Occasionally, he'd even show them adults engaged in sexual intercourse. He'd say to us, I want to show you pictures of things that moms and dads do. Let's also remember that these are the children of parents. Like, I mean, they're not just patients. These are 2 6-year-olds that belong to somebody, and their parents aren't there. They didn't give consent to this. And he's just sitting there in a room with them, talking about their sex lives and showing them child pornography. Somebody should have taken this guy on the street and shot him like a long time ago, and it's amazing that it didn't happen. It's usually what happened to these kind of guys. During these visits, the twins discovered that Money had 2 sides to his personality. Okay, this is key too. During these visits, the twins discovered that Money had 2 sides to his personality. One when mom and dad weren't around, and another when they were. When their parents were present, they say Money was avuncular, mild-spoken. But alone with the children, he could be irritable or worse, especially when they defied him. The children were particularly resistant to Money's request that they remove their clothes and inspect each other's genitals. Though they could not know this, such inspections were central to Money's theory of how children develop a sense of themselves as boys or girls, and thus to Money were crucial to the successful outcome of this Jones sex reassignment. So circa 1997, is that not Rolling Stone trying to kind of like give him cover for what he's doing? I mean, it just said that the little boys and girls, they don't like it when the weirdo makes them undress and look at each other's genitalia. Well, no shit, they don't. It was crucial for his research, though. It makes me think sometimes that like everything is just an excuse to get to this point, Like he just wants to get to this point because he's a pedophile, and then he's fine with destroying them after the fact because there's always another batch, The firmest possible foundations for gender schemes are the differences between male and female genitals and reproductive behavior. The foundation our culture strives mightily to withhold from children. All young primates explore their own and each other's genitals, he argued, and that includes human children everywhere. The only thing wrong about these activities is not to enjoy them, Money said. This is the guy that informs the policies that we are using today, the ones that say parents can be excluded from the transition process if a staff member decides so. Money was excluding the parents too, and look what he was doing. I'm not saying that anybody else is doing that, but I'm just saying there's a reason why. Yeah. You know what I mean. The children did not enjoy these enforced activities, which they were instructed to perform sometimes in front of Dr. Money, sometimes with as many as 5 or 6 of his colleagues in attendance. So 5 or 6 sexologists, sex researchers, crammed into the little office with the undressed 5 and 6-year-olds, one of them a horribly maimed victim. They're all poking, prodding, taking pictures, trying to make them do things to each other. I remember getting yelled at by Money because I was defiant. John says he told me to take my clothes off, and I just did not do it. I just stood there, and he screamed, "Now!" louder than that. I thought he was going to give me a whooping, so I took my clothes off and stood there, shaking. In a separate conversation, Kevin recalls that same incident. "Take your clothes off now," Kevin shouted. As early as age 8, Joan began to resist going to Baltimore. Money suggested to Linda and Frank that they sweeten the pill of the annual visits by blending the trip with a family vacation. Soon we were promising Disneyland and side trips to New York just to get her to go. It was also around Joan's 8th birthday that Dr. Money began increasingly to focus on the issue of vaginal surgery. That's what he needs to do to complete the thing, right? At the time of her castration at 22 months, Joan was left with only a cosmetic exterior. I talked to you about that before. We're going to kind of skip over this, but the surgeon had elected to wait until Joan's body was closer to full grown before he could do the full thing. So they're waiting for her growth to complete. So Money would love to be rid of these because he doesn't really care, but he needs to be able to complete his study. His study requires the final surgery, and he can't do that until she's done growing. So he's trying to get her ready, though, because he might want to go early. For Dr. Money, there was now an urgent need for Joan to prepare for this operation because the genital appearance was critical to Money's theory on how one learns a sexual identity. I'm sure he wanted to craft a fake genitalia and then use her for demonstrations. I mean, he was already doing that. So Money believed that Joan's sex change could not be complete until the physical portion was finished. There's only one problem. Joan was determined not to have the surgery ever. The children's increasingly stubborn refusal was not only a result of her deep-seated fear of hospitals, doctors, and needles. It also had to do with the realization that she'd made around the time of grade 2. That she was not a girl and never would be, no matter what her parents, her doctor, her teachers, or anyone else said. And remember, she doesn't have any male genitalia. So, the surgery wouldn't be something where she's thinking about getting something cut off. It would be a cosmetic thing. Further, she doesn't have any proof to herself that she's a boy other than just what's in her mind. She knows something's wrong. When Joan daydreamed of an ideal future, she said she saw herself first as a garbage man, but then later as a 21-year-old male with a mustache and a sports car, surrounded by admiring friends. By now, Joan was even more certain that submitting to surgery would lock her into a gender in which she felt increasingly trapped. She told Dr. Money that she did not want to have the surgery, but the psychologist did not seem to care. Instead, Money would once again break out his cache of photographs of naked women. He would focus Joan's gaze on them. "Can't you see that you're different? Look at that. You're not like that. That's why you need the surgery." God, he's sick. Joan, frightened but adamant, would simply refuse to lift her eyes. "Don't you want to be a normal girl?" Money would ask. "Don't you want to be normal?" Money continued to probe for the content of Joan's sexual fantasies. She's a 13-year-old. She tried to keep this information secret from the psychologist, and she believed herself successful. But according to Frank and Linda, her parents, she was wrong. By the time Joan turned 9, Dr. Money had informed them something had come up in his private sessions with Joan. Money told us that he had asked Joan what partner she would rather have. This is a 9-year-old. Private sessions. What? And Joan had said a girl. Frank recalls that Dr. Money wanted to know how they felt about raising a lesbian. I mean, what are they supposed to say? Everything has already happened. Lesbian's not bad at all. At a loss at how to respond to this news, but relieved that Money did not seem to think it significant, Frank said what he honestly believed about homosexuality. It's not really the most important thing in the world. Money evidently agreed, for this clinical finding was not included in his next report on the twins, which appeared in 1975 when they were 10 years old. It's funny. So Money and the parents know he's a boy, but they have this fiction in their minds where they're saying she's a lesbian girl. Published in the Archives of Sexual Behavior, the update was, if anything, a more glowing report than the one from 3 years before, recapping the earlier findings and adding a new example of the girl's femininity. No one outside the family would ever know she was born a boy. No one would ever conjecture. Her behavior is so normally that of an active little girl, and so clearly different by contrast from the boyish, brutish ways of her twin brother. It offers nothing to stimulate one's conjectures. That same year, Money published yet another account of Jones' successful metamorphosis. But this time, the intended audience was not only Money's scientific and medical colleagues, but also the general public. He had a new book out, and this was his bid for a wider audience. Stripped of the psychological jargon that makes his work impenetrable to normal people, he wrote a layman's terms edition of his sex reassignment, and the book offered Money's most unbelievedly upbeat, triumphant account of the case yet. He described Jones' sex reassignment as dramatic proof that gender identity is open at birth for normal options. The girl's subsequent history proves how well all three of them, the parents and the child, succeeded in adjusting to that decision to castrate the infant. Up to the age of 11, Jones' only psychological therapy was her annual visits to Dr. Money. Psychological therapy, her annual visits were where she got molested by him. But this changed in the fall of 76 when she entered a new school where her anxiety, social isolation, and fear immediately draw attention of teachers who once again notified the child guidance clinic. Jones' interests are strongly masculine, a teacher wrote in a report. She has marvelous plans for building tree houses, go-karts with CB radios and guns, model gas airplanes, and appears to be more competitive and aggressive than her brother, and is much more untidy both at home and in school. A session with the clinic's psychologist revealed that Joan had strong fears that something had been done to her genital organs and that she had some suicidal thoughts. That's an 11-year-old who doesn't know what's happened to her, talking to a psychologist that also doesn't know that she's a boy. So nobody cares about her, right? Like, they don't even tell anybody else so that she can get proper help. But she knows enough to know that there's something very wrong, and now it's creeping into her mind that she needs to kill herself. And remember, last time she went to see Money, he showed her naked pictures of adult females and said, "Don't you want to be normal? You look different." And remember that Joan said, "I must be an it." It's so cruel that they didn't tell her anything, because she had to have known that because she had an identical twin that she must have showered with, when they're little kids and ran around naked and stuff. She must have known that something was off with her body too, but nobody said anything. Keith Sigmundson, he's the good psychiatrist who would eventually break it open, talks about the first time he saw her. "I was struck by her masculine appearance. She was sitting there in a skirt with her legs apart, one hand planted firmly on a knee. There was nothing feminine about her. He decided that in overseeing her psychiatric treatment, he would support the process that Money had begun. It had gone too far to turn back, he thought, so he attempted to persuade the child to accept herself as a girl and submit to the vaginal surgery. To increase Joan's female identification, he referred her case to a woman's psychiatrist, Dr. M. Remember, Money is really putting the screws to the kid and all these other people to try to get Joan to do the surgery because he needs it to prove out his whole thing. Like, he's been telling everybody it's a huge success, so, naturally, he needs to get it done to prove that it was a success, and to finish it in general. Otherwise, he's going to have to explain why it fell apart, and he doesn't want to do that because he's already written the books that says that it was a success. The female psychologist notes early in her sessions that Joan voiced her conviction that she was just a boy with long hair and girls' clothes. That people looked at her and said, "She looks like a boy, talks like a boy." She also opened up about how she dreaded the trips to Baltimore where people looked at her and, quote, "A man shows me pictures of nude bodies and touches me." But the psychiatrist, I guess, who wasn't concerned about that, reassured Joan that she was indeed a girl and impressed upon her the necessity that she undergo surgery on her genitals. So let's recap that. A child tells an adult psychiatrist that she is scared to go to see this other doctor because he shows her nude bodies and touches her, and the psychiatrist's answer is, you need to get surgery on your genitals. None of these people have their interest in the right place. Ever. It's still the same today. I'm being molested. Help me. You need to get surgery on your genitals. Troubled nonetheless, the psychiatrist did write Dr. Money and communicated what Joan had said in the meetings, which basically amounted to ratting on Joan. So Money wrote back in 1977 saying that he was very pleased that the female psychiatrist was helping him. He explained that the second stage of the Joan's surgery had not yet been performed due to the child's fanatical fear of hospitals, which is made up. A fear that I have encountered on only one other occasion in 25 years of work at Johns Hopkins. Remember, she doesn't want to go there because of him and what he's doing to her in the appointments, but he's lying about it there. He added that mention of hormone treatments or surgery induced in Joan a panic so intense that it's impossible to broach any conversation on such matters without the child fleeing the room screaming. She wouldn't know what hormone treatment is. She's fleeing the room screaming because of what he's doing to her. Nevertheless, Money continued. There was now an urgency that Joan's fears be overcome because the need for hormone therapy and surgery was rapidly increasing with approaching adolescence. It will be one of the best things you can do for her, Money wrote to the psychiatrist, if you can help her break down this extraordinary veto. I mean, so centered on just what he wants. More surgery on. Despite all efforts, Joan continued to hold out against surgery. I mean, why would they even, it doesn't say what they said to her to justify the need for it, right? Like, because they've told her she's just a normal girl. Why are they saying that she needs to do this? I don't get it. Money refused even to permit her pediatric endocrinologist to conduct a physical exam of her genitals. Then in the late summer of 1977, when she turned 12, she had to fend off an attack on another front. On her last trip to Baltimore, Money had spoken about medication he would soon put her on in order to make her a normal girl. He was talking about estrogen, the female hormone needed to stimulate the effects of female puberty on Joan's broad-shouldered, narrow-hipped boy physique. Like vaginal surgery, the prospect of developing a female figure struck Joan as nightmarish. So she was suspicious when one day her father produced a bottle of pills and told her to start taking them. What's this medicine for? Joan asked. Frank, struggling for the best way to put it, finally came up with, it's to make you wear a bra. I said, I don't want to wear a bra. John recalls I threw a fit. But after repeated entreaties from parents and the endocrinologist, not to mention the threat, which Dr. Money had introduced, that she would grow disproportionate limbs if she failed to take the drug. So she's going to grow crazy, unbalanced limbs if she doesn't do what he says. Joan finally, and with great reluctance, began to take the pills. It was around this time that Money authored another update on the twins, this one even more sunny. Now pre-puberty in age, the girl has a feminine gender identity and role distinctly different from that of her brother, reported. Perhaps forgetting what he had told Joan's parents 4 years earlier about her sexual orientation, he wrote, the final and conclusive evidence awaits the appearance of romantic interest and erotic imagery. Though Joan often only pretended to take her estrogen pills, by May 1978, prior to her 13th birthday, the effects were visible. A pair of small but distinct breasts had appeared on her chest, along with padding of fat around her waist and hips. She remained stubbornly opposed to further surgery, a fact that became dramatically clear during her visit that spring to Johns Hopkins. This would be the last time Joan would ever consent to go to Baltimore. That something remarkable had occurred during Joan's visit is obvious from a letter that Dr. Money wrote in August 1978, some weeks after the encounter. He said that Joan was still determined to avoid talk of sex or surgery, and when she was pressed on those points, she left the room to join her brother. I followed, Money wrote, and in bringing the session to a close, put my hand on her shoulder in what most youngsters would accept as a reassurance. She fled in panic. Of course she did. You've been abusing her year after year. It's the first thing she can remember. Money then described how one of his students followed Joan to help her recover her composure. They walked, saying little, for a mile. In concluding his oddly elliptical-sounding account of these events, Money referred to the student as a woman. What he did not mention was that woman had begun life as a man. She was a male-to-female transsexual, one of the many readily available from the Johns Hopkins Gender Identity Clinic, and Money had apparently enlisted them to speak to Joan about the need for her to get a surgical construction of a vagina. Money said, "I've got someone for you to talk to who's been through what you're going to be going through," as if there's no choice. Joan was then ushered into the presence of a person whom she immediately identified as a man wearing makeup. Picturing that general, right? Like that, you know, the one with the lipstick. Dressed in women's clothing with a women's hairstyle, but a man nonetheless. When the person spoke, it was in a breathy, artificially high-pitched voice. "He's telling me about the surgery," John says, "how fantastic it was for her and how her life turned out beautifully." But Joan sat immobile, silent, apparently listening. The words were not reaching her, though. She was fighting off a clamoring, rising panic in her mind. "I was thinking, am I going to end up like this guy?" Today, John cannot remember bolting from the room. "I remember running, that's all." They ran blindly until they reached a set of stairs, which she dashed up. She emerged on a rooftop where she tried to hide, but the transsexual followed, increasing Joan's panic. Coaxed down from the roof, Joan told her mother that if forced to return to see Dr. Money ever again, she would kill herself. She repeated the threat to her father, and he thought she meant it. Dr. Money was, it seemed, not inclined to lose contact that easily. In early 1979, roughly 8 months after the last trip, Money wrote to Linda saying that he would soon be passing through her city to give a talk at the local university and medical center. He said he'd like to drop by the house and see them. So on a gray day in March 1979, Money arrived at their doorstep carrying only a single knapsack. The twins, aware of Money's arrival, disappeared into the basement and refused to come upstairs. This should tell you all you need to know about the guy, right? If you're the parents, look for these cues. The adults engaged in small talk. Money said he was catching a flight later in the day, but both Frank and Linda noticed that he was not really in a hurry. On a tour of the house, Money complimented Linda's ink drawings, and he reminisced about his childhood in New Zealand. Finally, Dr. Money announced that, oops, he'd missed his flight. Frank and Linda looked at each other and felt that it was the right thing to do and invite him to stay over, though they only had a foam air mattress in their front room for him to sleep on. To their surprise, the eminent psychologist from Johns Hopkins accepted the offer. In order to accommodate their unexpected house guests, the Thesens phoned out for extra food, bucket of chicken. The children continued to hide in the basement for the rest of the night. "We didn't want to come up," Kevin recalls. "We were forced into it eventually. They said come up, so we had to come up. I wound up being Mr. Polite," John says, recalling the stiff encounter. Kevin remembers that Dr. Money asked general questions about how the twins were doing in school. Kevin asked how Dr. Money liked their city and how long he was staying. Then, Kevin says, we wanted to go. But before the two retreated into the basement, Dr. Money pulled out his wallet and saying something about how he would have spent the money on a hotel room anyway, gave the kids $15 each. They fled to the basement without saying thank you and didn't emerge until the next morning when the world-famous sexologist had left for the airport. It was the last that the family and Dr. Money would ever see of each other. By the time she turned 14 in August 1979, Joan had been on female hormones for about 2 years. But the drugs were now in competition with her male system, which, despite the absence of testicles, was in the full flood of puberty. A fact readily apparent not only in her loping walk and the angular manliness of her gestures, but in the dramatic deepening of her voice, which, after a period of breaking and cracking, had dropped into its current rumbling register. Physically, her condition was such that strangers turned to stare at her, as was noted by her therapist. But to the close observer, it was Joan's mental state that would have drawn particular scrutiny. For as photographs from this period reveal, Joan, for all her attempts to drag a smile onto her face, had the wounded eyes of a shamed and hunted animal. It was at this point that Joan took the matter of her sexual destiny into her own hands and simply stopped living as a girl. Therapy notes from November 1979 revealed that she refused to wear dresses and now favored a tattered jean jacket, ragged cords, and work boots. Her hair was unwashed, uncombed, matted. I was at that age when you rebel, John says. I got so sick to death of doing what everyone wanted me to do. I got to that point in my life. I knew I was an oddball. I knew I was an it. But I was willing to live my life as an oddball. If I wanted to wear my hair in a mess, I wore it in a mess. I wore my own clothes the way I wanted to. And Joan had more private ways of rebelling. Since childhood, she'd been instructed by both her parents and doctors to urinate in the sitting position, despite a strong, overriding urge to stand. For years, she tried to adhere to the stricture, but no longer. No one was around, I just stand up. No big deal. It was easier for me to do anyways. Just stand up and go. What difference does it make? But it made a difference to her peers. That fall, Joan transferred to a technical high school where she enrolled in an appliance repair course. There, she was quickly dubbed Cave Woman and Sasquatch and was openly told, "You're a boy." But it was her inclination to urinate in the male posture that caused the greatest friction between her and her schoolmates. The girls barred her from using their bathroom. She tried sneaking into the boys' room, but was kicked out and threatened with a knifing. With nowhere else to go, Joan was reduced to urinating in a back alley at school. By December, she just stopped. She refused to go to school any further. By now, it was impossible for her local doctors to ignore the obvious. After 4 years of fruitlessly trying to implement Dr. Money's plan, the physicians experienced a change of heart. Among those who believed that Joan would never submit to a surgery was Dr. No name given, an empathetic female psychiatrist in semi-retirement who had taken over Joan's case in the winter. She said that the endocrinologist was one of the last who wanted the surgery, probably because money was trying to get him too. But now even he began to waver. Early on, I had pushed for surgery, he wrote in his letter, but I'm not convinced now that this is a good idea, and therefore at the present time, I have no plans or opinions. Ultimately, Joan forced the endocrinologist to come down off the fence. During an appointment in his office, Joan refused to remove her hospital gown for a breast exam. The doctor asked again. She refused. The standoff went 20 minutes. Comes to a point in your life where you say, I've had enough, John says. There's a limit for everybody, and this is my limit. But Dr. W had reached the limit too. Do you want to be a girl or not? He demanded. It was a question Joan had heard before, a question Money had been asking her since the dawn of consciousness. A question the local doctors had badgered her with for 4 years. A question she'd heard once too often. She raised her head and bellowed into his face, God damn it, no. The doctor left his office for a moment and then he returned. Okay, he said, you can get dressed and go home. Only later would John learn that Dr. W had, in stepping out into the hallway, spoken with Dr. McKay, the other endocrinologist. He told her that in his opinion, it was time that the teenager was told the truth of who she was and what had happened to her. It was Frank's custom to pick up Joan in the car after her weekly sessions with a psychiatrist. The afternoon of March 14th, 1980 was no exception. But when Joan climbed into the car that day, Frank said that instead of driving straight home, they should go get an ice cream. Immediately, Joan was suspicious. Usually when there's some kind of disaster in the family, good old dad takes you out in the family car for a cone or something, John says. I was thinking, is mom dead? Are you guys getting a divorce? Is everything okay with Kev? John was funny, man. No, Frank said to Joan's nervous questioning. Everything is fine. And indeed, he couldn't find the words to explain until Joan had bought her ice cream and Frank had pulled the car into the family's driveway. He just started explaining step by step everything that happened to me, John says. It was the first time, Linda says, that John ever saw his father cry. Joan herself remained dry-eyed, staring straight ahead through the windshield, the ice cream cone melting in her hand. She didn't cry or anything, Frank says, almost 2 decades after this extraordinary encounter between father and child. She just sat there listening, real quiet. I guess she was so fascinated with this unbelievable tale that I was telling her. Today, John says that the revelations awoke many emotions within him. Anger, disbelief, amazement. But he says that the one emotion erode all the others. I was relieved, he says, blinking away tears. Suddenly it made sense why I felt the way I did. I wasn't some sort of weirdo. I just had this thing happen to me. Joan did have a question for her father. It concerned that brief, charmed span of 8 months directly after her birth, the only period of her life that she'd ever been or ever would be fully intact. What, she asked, was my name? Joan's decision to undergo a sex change was immediate. She changed her name to John and demanded male hormone treatments. She had surgery to complete her metamorphosis back from girl to boy. That fall, he had his breasts surgically removed. Remember, he's a boy by chromosome birth. The following summer, he had a rudimentary penis constructed. The operation was completed 1 month prior to his 16th birthday. Socially, John says, it proved relatively easy to effect the change to his true status. Joan's lifelong social rejection had guaranteed that no one had ever gotten close enough to her to remark on her sudden vanishing. Oh, that's so sad. Nobody missed her. Still, John laid low for a couple months in his parents' basement, watching TV. That's all I did, he says. I wasn't really happy. I wasn't really sad. I just was. But gradually, he began to emerge, hanging out at the local fast food joints, the roller rink bars with Kevin and his friends, who immediately accepted him as one of the guys. It was in John's relations to girls that complications developed. They were only exacerbated by the fact that by 18 he was not merely a passively attractive young man, but an arrestingly handsome one. His sudden popularity with what was now the opposite sex introduced a terrible dilemma, because he knew that his penis neither resembled nor performed like the real thing. It wasn't functional. How do you even start dating? He says, you can't. You're in such an embarrassing situation. At the same time, if you're not honest with them, they're going to want to start getting frisky with you. So what he's saying is, he was handsome, the girls liked him, but at 18, he would have to try to have a conversation with them about the fact that he was horribly maimed. Eventually, he did date a girl 2 years his junior, a pretty but flighty 16-year-old. Several months into the relationship, John entrusted her with his secret, telling her that he'd suffered an accident. Within days, everyone knew, John says. She'd gossiped about him. Just as in his childhood, he was suddenly the object of muttered comments, giggling, ridicule, crudely drawn cartoons. Days later, he swallowed a bottle of antidepressants and lay down on his parents' sofa to die. His parents discovered him unconscious. Me and Linda looked at each other, and we were wondering if we should even wake him up. Think about that. We looked at each other and wondered if we should even wake him up. That's your fucking son. Linda recalls her doubts. I said to Frank, I wonder if we should just leave him because that kid has done nothing but suffer all his life. He really wants to die. Then I said, no, I can't let him die. I have to try to save him. They lifted him and rushed him to the hospital where his stomach was pumped. On his release a week later, he tried it again. This time, his brother saved him. John withdrew from the world. He spent sojourns of up to 6 months at a time alone, without speaking to anybody, in a cabin in the woods. Unable to face people, he fantasized about committing a crime that would land him in solitary confinement for the rest of his days. I despised myself. I hated myself. I hated how my life turned out. I was frustrated and angry. I didn't know who I was angry at. How about money? When he was 21, he underwent a second operation on his penis that yielded a significant improvement over his first phalloplasty. It now resembled a real one, and nerve grafts from his arm even supplied him with some sensation. But it would be 2 years before he attempted to use it in sexual contact. The delay had less to do with his feelings of confidence about himself. He says it had more to do with the legacy of what had been done to him by Dr. Howard Jones in the operating room at Johns Hopkins when he was 22 months old. I kept thinking, what am I going to say to the woman I meet who I want to marry? What am I going to say to her when she wants children and I can't give her children? So when he says that, let's repeat this part. The delay had less to do with his feelings of confidence about his penis, he says, than with the legacy of what had been done to him in the operating room at Johns Hopkins when he was 22 months old. He's not talking about the accident. He's not talking about the surgery that occurred right after the accident. He's talking about when they castrated him. Something that didn't need to happen. He's talking about when Dr. Money had him castrated at 22 months old because now he's got a serious girlfriend and he wants to be able to have kids, and they arbitrarily took that from him to fulfill some guy's pseudo science fiction bet about by that time his brother Kevin had been married and become a father, everything that John had wanted for himself. I was so terribly lonely. I decided to do something I'd never done before. I wound up praying to God. I said, God, you know I've had a terrible life. I'm not going to complain to you because you must have a good idea of why you're putting me through this. But I could be a good husband if I was given the chance. I think I could be a good father if I was given a chance. 2 months later, Kevin and his wife introduced John to a young woman they had met. At age 26, she was 3 years John's senior, a pretty, loving, single mother of 3 children by 3 separate fathers. By the time I met John, she says, I'd come to the end of my rope with men. I kept trusting them. Then it was like, you're pregnant? I'm out of here. She says that John's condition did not make a difference to her. It probably would have if I didn't already have kids, but what I'd been through with men, I figured, what the hell does it matter what he's got between his legs? If he's good to me and the kids, that's all that matters. The two hit it off. She liked John's old-fashioned gallantry. He still sends me flowers and writes me notes, she says. How many people have that after 9 years together? John fell in love with what he calls her true heart. Less than a year after they started going out, John asked her to marry him. She accepted, and when John was 25, they wed. John landed a well-paying factory job, bought a house in a trim and tidy middle-class neighborhood near his parents, and settled down with his wife, and they had 3 adopted children into a life of domestic anonymity. For years, Keith Sigmundson had been seeing the advertisements. They appeared like clockwork every year in the American Psychiatric Society Journal, and they always said the same thing. Will whoever is treating the twins please report? Below this entreaty was always the same address, Dr. Milton Diamond, University of Hawaii. I would see it, but I couldn't bring myself to answer, said the twin psychiatrist. In the past, Sigmundson himself had toyed with the idea of publishing the true outcome of John's case. Remember, these guys know that John lied, that Money lied, because he's treating John. And he's seen the thing in the American Psychiatry magazine where the rival of Money in Hawaii is saying, somebody get in touch with me. We don't know where the twins went. We're trying to see what happened. But I hadn't done it yet for a very simple reason. Done it, contact Diamond. I was shit scared of John Money. He was the big guy, the guru. I didn't know what it would do to my career. So he put it out of his head. Diamond, however, didn't give up so easy. I'm going to come to a stop right now. I'm going to, you'll probably notice that at the time of this article, everybody's still alive, right? And we'll go into that in part 2, but that's not how it ends, right? So obviously, John Joan kills himself. His marriage falls apart. That the memories of the abuse becomes more and more prominent. I glossed over it this time, but Dr. Money liked to make him and his brother simulate sex in front of other colleagues and coworkers. Like when they're little boys, he would make his brother like simulate sex with him. Like he'd have to be the female, and his brother would be the male, like when they were 6 and 7, and all the doctors would watch and laugh at him and take pictures, and that was just one of the things that he had reoccurring nightmares about. Not that he was ashamed about what they were doing, because they were just kids, but the feeling of just being an it, just being such a freak that they're just something for them to toy with and laugh at. He just could never get over that. So he killed himself, and then his brother killed himself shortly thereafter. Dr. Money, obviously he was outed slightly by this story, but he did a lot of deflect, deny, make counter accusations, sociopathy type thing. He tried to blame it on Joan John for not participating in treatment right, said he was an addict, said he was implied that they were a sex worker. Just horrible shit. So next we'll talk about how things were going in the Netherlands, where they weren't concentrating as much on the surgical portion of gender transitioning, but they were hitting kids hard and heavy with hormones, puberty blockers as young as 5. And although we call them puberty blockers here, the accurate description of them is chemical castration in full adult formulation and provided off-label. So again, it's more pseudoscience fiction. And the crazy thing about the puberty blockers is that the community describes them as a pause and as a diagnostic. It says it in the Lake Stevens policy and in the supporting documentation. Puberty blockers will give you time to think about things, time to make an informed decision, time to give informed consent. In reality, as soon as you start taking them, they have such an incredibly negative effect on your body and your reproductive system. First, you're castrated, and then it, like, if for the boys, it destroys their genitalia. So, like, saying that you can go back the other direction after your penis has been shrunk by 400% and you've lost the ability to reproduce, you're pot committed to go through the sex change now. So it's always been a lie to say that it's a diagnostic or a pause. If anything, it was designed to make sure that you had to go through with the sex change, because, as we'll cover in that, the people over in the Netherlands only started using that particular medication after an early longitudinal study came out of the first 45 men that went to their gender clinic. They followed them for a decade to get their outcomes. 45 sissy boys, they called them at the time, interested in transgender surgery. Well, by the time they were 21, 44 of them had never mentioned trans surgery again, weren't transgender at all. Most of them turned out to be gay men, but 44 out of 45 didn't transition, had no interest in it. One did. So when the researchers saw that, they realized that if they wanted to keep this transgender thing going, they needed to have a mechanism that would convert a much higher degree than 1 out of every 45. At that point, they started prescribing off-label this chemical castration drug. That drug was so damaging that a couple years ago, the UK had to do an independent review. They had a very rigorous board come forward, and as a result of that review, they shuttered the world's largest gender clinic, Tavistock, completely closed it, and they've done a big intervention that just had its results published in April of this year, and it basically is extremely critical of this entire ordeal, this entire process, and mainly the fact that there's no scientific research behind any of this, that everything has been, fly of the seat of the pants, pseudoscientific experiments on children, and they've called a complete halt to it there. Now, here things are different. We're going to cover the medical aspect of it, and we're going to cover the most popular tropes, the emotional blackmail, the give your kid what they want or they'll kill themselves, and how wrong that is, factually incorrect. We'll cover the puberty blockers and what that actually is. And we'll talk about how this entire process, the entire idea of transitioning, is born out of Dr. Money and what he did to this poor boy, this family, and how he took what wasn't an intact baby, a hurt baby, a wounded baby, but a baby that would have been just fine to be a boy who was able to reproduce the way that he was built, and who would have been much happier in the life that he would have had without the interventions, without the abuse, without the brutal surgeries and regimens of drugs and very selfish interventions in his life. And off the back of killing 2 children and ruining a family, Money built a career of riches and fame, and built a process that how hard people will fight for this, right? Like, they want people to go to jail for misgendering you. Like, you get kicked off the social platforms. You can't question any of this, right? Like, they were shutting people down, firing people from jobs, leaving no room at all to question any of it. There's still not much room for that, but the further I got into this, it just became clear. This is all fact, right? Like, this happened. Not only is this thing founded on some of the most hellish scenes that you can imagine, right? So we've gone about Dr. Money and what he did, pedophile, sexual deviant, liar, right? Just evil. And then we've talked about how on the Netherlands side, they did a study that had 70 kids in it. They got results from 50. One of them died, and he died because the puberty blockers had made his penis so small that they couldn't craft a fake vagina out of it, so they had to pull his intestines through his ass and craft a fake genitalia out of an intestine, which obviously is all kinds of horrible. And because there's also experimental on top of everything else, got horribly infected. So he died with his insides hanging out on the outsides, fashioned into a crude set of genitalia that got infected, and he died in horrible pain, knowing, I'm sure, that the area of his body that had been the center of all attention his whole life had turned on him and was going to end him. So I don't know, like, the tendency to want to draw, like, I don't know, broader themes out of this, good and evil, heaven and hell, that kind of stuff. It's hard not to, because the evil is so clear, the pain is so deep. But I kind of think that's beside the point, because there's action to be done right now. There's work to be done right now. And the first thing that needs to be done is this information needs to get out so people know that this was founded, this was written up, this was done by a sex criminal, a pedophile, and a killer, and that children died for this, and that we've been told a fib. We've been painted a picture that's not true, and that, well, many parents think it's the very socially progressive thing or the good thing to do to encourage a kid who is having some questions about their gender. People need to know how dangerous it is as soon as they put their child on that path to transition. Simply putting them on that path enough where they declare that they're transgender or change their name, suicidality and risk factors probably go up tenfold, right? And if they get on those puberty blockers, then you know for sure that they're going to suffer permanent damage to their body, and they're on the way to chemically castrated. Let's not forget, the puberty blockers are an adult dosage of chemical castration that they use in prisons to castrate sexual deviants. Let's end on that note and keep that in the front of the mind. And I'll be back tomorrow with the second part of this. We'll finish up laying the history of this so that everybody has an idea of what this movement is and then I'll apply it forward in the third piece, which will be a written article too, because I want to make sure that the school board sees this. I want to make sure that they understand where this came from, so that then they can make a decision if they want to change their policy immediately or not. And from there, we'll take further action. I have noticed that OSPI has their policy as marked under review, but other than that, everybody's still got the same policies as before. I will link to my resources on the podcast episode and at j425.com or thejournal425.com. I'll put this on the front page. So whether you're listening to this on podcast or watching it, thanks. Sorry this was so long. And thanks for sticking this out. This is really important. There's kids getting transitioned right now. They're being given bad information. And if we can save one kid from getting on that course of chemical castration medication or getting in a room with today's version of Dr. Money, then that's a heroic act. So I'm just hoping that some of you may have a kid in your life that is affected by some of this. And you know what? Parents or kids involved in a transition, I'd love to hear from you. Obviously, I hope you know that got nothing but love for you, and that my critique is obviously to the systems that are failing you and to the adults that are capitalizing on you. And would love to hear what things are like on a day-to-day basis for you, just to educate me if nothing else. So feel free to DM me or call me, 425-953-6762. And after I finish the third article, we'll see where we're at. We'll see. I'd like to get a kind of a read from people in the community about whether this information changes their feeling about transitioning and that sort of thing, or whether they still feel like a policy of blanket support for any kid that is interested in pursuing transition, whether that's appropriate, whether it's appropriate that the school district has a policy that says they can, on a case-by-case basis, decide if parents should even know that a transition is ongoing. So I'll post the packet that has an example of the transition form. Actually, let's look at that right now. I'll show you the form used to transition. No, that's not it. Okay. No, that's a Dutch protocol. Damn it. What am I looking for? Schools in transition. This is it. There it is. Okay, let's take a quick look at the come on, that's not it. Yeah. Okay. Oh, there it is. Okay, so this is the supporting documentation that was given to schools as they implemented the gender policy, right? So this is the thing I was telling you about at the beginning. Distributed by OSPI, our state's nonpartisan public education department. Look, it's written by ACLU Transgender Youth Project, Gender Spectrum, which is a far left organization, Human Rights Campaign, far left organization. These are partisan, political, social agenda, non-medical entities that obviously are supportive of transitioning kids, and they get to write the definitive medical best practices guide that goes out to all of our students, all of our school districts. Because of why? Like, what expertise do they have? Why do they get free? It's pretty brazen to, even, I know it's a Democrat running things there, but like, you're talking about the health of kids and you're going to be that overtly partisan? Because they're well aware that like conservatives and religious people are opposed to this on the face of it. They are not respectful of that at all, even though it's supposed to be nonpartisan, unbiased. They didn't even bother getting doctors. So this guide is crazy. Chapter 5 is complex issues. It tells you how to deal with parents who are concerned about, I don't know, their kid living, probably. I'll link this too, but you can find it if you just do Gender Inclusive Schools, OSPI, but I'll link it. Chapter 5. This is the one where it tells you how to get parents on board. It even, like, it talks about threatening parents. It talks about custody and how to weaponize custody. If it's a divorced parent and one of them isn't on board transition, how to weaponize custody. It also talks about how a teacher or staff member might be able to testify against a parent that isn't on board. Like, what? Since when did it get so involved? School officials interact with the student on a daily basis, which gives school personnel unique insight into the student's needs. That they're saying that as opposed to you, the parent, because this chapter is about parents. A parent's negative reaction to a child's gender often comes from a place of love. It's a misguided attempt at protection. It's not misguided at all. All their footnotes too. Notice they're just like more sentences with nothing sourced, or they source their own. They'll source like some statement that they say by citing themselves, because it's all gobbledygook. Like, the fact that we let gobbledygook support stuff that is harming kids is just crazy. All right, what was it? I wanted to show you the transition plan thing. Okay. The Q&A is crazy too. You should read that. But all right, this is the gender support plan. That's like the less serious of the two. So these are documents made for the school district. Here it is. Confidential Gender Transition Plan. This document supports the necessary planning for students' formal transition of gender from its assumed status to something else. This will identify the specific actions taken by the student, school, family, support providers. So this is a form for the school district internally to plan the transition of a child. Look at some of these questions. What is the nature? How urgent is it? Look at this one. Parent guardian involvement. Are guardians of this student aware? If not, what considerations must be accounted for in implementing this plan? In other words, are the parents aware? Oh, they're not? Okay, how are we going to still implement this plan? Parents aren't aware, we're still going to transition this kid. And we've just talked about what transitioning means, right? Chemical castration, physical castration, permanent mental, physical scars, being around a bunch of sexually deviant criminals. They're not all like that, but it's just everybody who's like designed the process. They have a record like that. Anyways, so this document is real interesting. And if I were a parent with a kid in high school, I might do fill out the paperwork to get a file, get the information released and see my kid's file. You could just ask them, right? But I'd want to know if one of these transition plans was being done on one of my relatives. It still blows me away that schools that haven't even mastered the ability to fire a serial molester think that they're the ones to cut a parent out of the process and secretly begin transitioning a minor, male to female. It says it right here. What is even going on? Oh, man. People, this has got to end.
On Twitter, these maybe feminists saying, "Oh, they're giving kids the same drug they give to chemically castrate sex offenders." And I thought that's obviously nonsense. Obviously they're not going to do that. And then I looked into it a bit more, and this drug Lupron, which is used in America, was the same drug. And I thought it must be the same. Must be a very different dose. They must be giving a 1/100th of the dose to these kids that they give to the sex offenders. And then I realized it's the same dose, and then I became a bit more concerned about this, and I started reading because I'm a social scientist, so I start reading the literature. When I read the first paper from the Dutch clinicians about the first guinea pig, the girl is now called FG, or was called B in the paper, I thought this doesn't seem like a good outcome at all. Why is this meant to be a good outcome? Because when she was followed up.
Could you explain why it's not a good outcome?
Because when she was followed up at the age of in her 30s or early 30s, or early 30s, which way you want to say, they were ashamed of their genitals and couldn't hold down a relationship with a woman because they're so sort of ashamed of their genitals. So it was very odd to say, well, that we've cured the gender dysphoria, but this person's very ashamed of their genitals and can't have a
And this was the only long-term study we really had of something.
Yeah, and and supposedly that was how wonderful. This was the study that came out in 2014, the follow-up study. So I thought that doesn't sound good at all. And then when I looked at the article that really lays out the sort of the positive empirical evidence, again 2014, they started off with 70 kids, and then one of them dies. So I thought, that doesn't seem such a great thing. If you take 70 healthy Dutch teenagers, probably have a longest life expectancy of any country in the world, and then you kill one of them. That again, I wasn't seeing from my scrutiny of the literature a very positive. It was a very mixed record at best.
Grade 5-9.
I'm a fuck boy. Fucking look like they could trust boss. Yeah, full of hate, I'ma kill y'all. Sick you riding on blades like a hot bar. Hey, 50K on the chain. Great, that's a gang. Loaded case, sleeper stank. Fucking biting, I'm a brain. Split it back up with the cock out like a menace. Give me a minute, I'ma make sure that it's finished. If I'm riding, better call and say your pins. Should've listened to your bitch in the beginning. A-Y-K-I-L-L-E-R. So many bodies made a happy at that E-R. Running my eyes, smoking a got it for my leash. Whipping the miles, pumping the shot, trick or squeeze. Breaking the beats, swerving the beans, fucking the means. Gunning and fucking the murder, the pussy and her friend. My reality is hell, I don't pretend. Yeah. I just learned to blend in with the sin. Here we go again, here we go. Wanna come and try, sick it, you should know. I I got 1,000 ways for you to end it, yellow tape. And I got plenty people around me wanna run it right.
100K on the fuck boy. Fuck I look like, think I trust boys. Yeah, full of hate, I'm a killjoy. We be riding on blades like a hot boy. Ay, 50K on the chain, chain, chain. Great, it's a gang, gang, gang. Load the case, leave a stain, stain, stain. 100, fucking right, I'm on my brain. 100K for the car, $500,000 for the addiction. They shipped me off the rehab cause I started questioning my existence. Give me them prescriptions and I show you repetition. Stubborn motherfucker, you know we never listen. What? Grade 5, 9 by